All right, so hello everyone. I think my I think my live stream here might have started a little bit later than I originally thought it was going to. I thought I was live, and it looks like I was just streaming and recording the live. I wasn't actually live on YouTube. I want to double check to make sure. I think we're good to go now. So thank you for tuning in, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. I'm very excited to share some of my earlier plein air work with you. I just started recording like a 3 or 4 minute intro here that I'll start over because I'm not sure if it's going to be tied to my YouTube video once this is published. Anyway, my name is Hector Acuna. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Or if you're watching this as a recording, thank you so much for spending some time to learn about my history as an artist, especially for my plein air portfolio, which I'm excited to talk about today. So before I get into the portfolio, there were a few things I wanted to share with you, just some recent updates this week on projects that I've been working on. I was starting to talk about this project or partnership that I'm a part of with a gallery in Port Washington, Wisconsin called Gallery 224. And they've been doing this partnership program with artists and nature preserves, art conservation groups that are somewhat local to the northern Milwaukee area in Wisconsin. And artists can apply to be juried into this partnership program. And I'm very honored to be one of 12 selected artists for the 2024 cohort. And so that being said, the locations that I chose to partner with, initially I was going to be just with the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory group, but I found out that they don't actually have a physical space, and I was hoping to do a lot of plein air painting, so that's something that I had to, sort of work around. Hey, Steven, thanks for tuning in. It's fun to see some comments in the chat come in. So if you're watching and you have any questions or you just want to say hi, feel free to write things in the chat. I'll make sure to keep an eye on the chat. But yeah, this Art Servancy program, it's a year-long commitment. And the other location I chose is Bratwoods, which is only maybe about 5 minutes or less than that to get there from where I live. So it's very convenient. Where it's located. This is the first painting that I've started. It's about, I think it's 22 by 22 or maybe 26 by 26 inches. It's kind of in that range to give you a sense of scale. And this is the current state of the painting. So I'm obviously painting this trunk of a tree. Someone told me that this was a maple tree, but I haven't confirmed that yet. My tree identification needs some work. So if anyone out there is into tree identification and you have a go-to book and resource, feel free to share that with me as I do more tree paintings in plein air. It's been a really fun painting to make. You can see there's some really nice variation of shape and line, and I'm starting to push the color back towards more of a muted range. For a little while there, it got really chromatic and really saturated, which honestly I was kind of excited about. It's fun to take something fairly muted, like a tree in the spring or in the fall when a lot of the color is sort of faded away, and to find these really dynamic and really potent color contrasts. So that's what I was doing the last couple sessions, and this is after 5 sessions now. So I would estimate I've probably put in maybe like 15 hours, between 12 and 15 hours on this painting. So hey Jane, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in again. It's cool to have some local Wisconsin painting buddies here in the chat. So thanks for joining me today, you guys. I hope you're having a nice day. I'm just talking a little bit about the Art Servancy program that I'm a part of this year. I just wanted to share some updates on where this painting is at. I'm hoping that maybe after 2 or 3 more sessions it'll be done. I really want this to feel pretty solid and just really resolved. So I'm allowing myself to go back and really polish out some of the details. But and then something else I started this week was a little animal skull still life. I think this might be like a raccoon skull. I'm not positive. I've had this skull since I was like maybe 10 or 11 years old. We found it on my family's little hobby farm property in southeast Wisconsin. So, it's been in this Ziploc bag for the past 8 to 10 years, and it's been a lot of fun to kind of hang on to it and hope that it maybe could lead to some sort of a painting subject. And that's finally what's happened now. So this is a little still life study that I started a few days ago, just working on our couch in the living room, painting from natural light, which has been really fun. When I come out of a plein air event, I either go into my studio and I start working from photos or my imagination, or I try to do stuff like this where I continue this study of natural light. And I've been finding that it's really worth it to set up these little still lifes and try to work from natural light when possible, just to keep keep the skills sharp and keep my eyes kind of in check with observing some of these nuances of light and color and that kind of stuff. I'm not super thrilled about the composition, but because of that, I really want to push the interest in the subject of the skull. So I'm hoping to maybe do 1 or 2 more sessions with this and really create this illusion of depth and volume and detail of the kind of the brittle quality of the bone that's visible in person. So that's something I'm working on. And the last thing I wanted to share before I get into the portfolio today was just some color exercises that I've started to do. If you've been following my work for a while, you're familiar then with the color chart book that I made about a year ago. I started it, and it took me up until a few months ago to really finish all of those pages. And I've been using it a lot at plein air events and just for choosing limited palettes for both studio and plein air paintings. And what I kind of don't like about that book, though, is that everything is tinted with white. So titanium white has a very chalky opacity that cools off a lot of your temperatures, but also kind of desaturates a lot of the chroma. And I've been noticing that in some of my plein air paintings when I'm dipping into titanium white frequently. The paintings have kind of a chalky quality that I'm not super thrilled about. So this is one way that I'm trying to kind of remind myself that, hey, you can brighten your colors with other pigments outside of titanium white. And yellow is a really good hue to do that because it is such a bright, high key value right out of the tube. So these are 4 little color gradients that I mixed up last night just with a palette knife, and I put pieces of tape in between these columns of colors. And what we're looking at are 4 different pages of color mixtures using alizarin permanent and cobalt blue, and then the yellow changes from each of the 4 pages. So on this top left page, this is with cadmium green from Gamblin. It's a very high key green that in a lot of ways it is very similar to some of the cadmium yellows. So I thought I would bring it in and see what would happen with alizarin and cobalt blue. The next page on the top right is with yellow ochre, so you can tell the saturation and the chroma is a lot weaker just because you don't get that really electric yellow that cadmium offers, which are the other 2 yellows on the bottom of the page. So on the left side, we're looking at a cadmium yellow light, which is a much cooler yellow in comparison to cadmium yellow medium. And these are 2 staple colors on my palette. Honestly, all 4 of these yellows are kind of staple colors on my palette. And cobalt blue is a blue that I don't really use very often, so this is kind of also a way for me to test out some greens and middle mixtures with cobalt blue as opposed to phthalo and ultramarine blue, which are my other blues that I use more frequently. But anyway, if you're into color theory and if you're into studying relativity of color, this is a really good exercise, especially if you also want to try painting with limited palettes more frequently. What's nice about each of these pages is that they have an inherent harmony as primary color palettes. So what I might do in the future is look at one of these pages and go, oh, I kind of like this range of temperature or this range of chroma if I use cadmium green for a yellow and then go with cobalt and alizarin. I can kind of get a really quick sense for the range of pigment and the range of temperature that those 3 colors offer. And again, this is without titanium white, so it also gives me a little bit of a value reference there as well, which is really nice. But each of these pages only took me about 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to make. The hard part is mixing up your colors. And what I decided to do at some point was pre-mix each column's range of values, and then just basically go in from each pile and with my palette knife just kind of apply the paint in this gradient of color. And I'm pretty sure I used like a 5-step value scale. So I had alizarin permanent just straight out of the tube, cadmium green straight out of the tube, and then I had 3 middle mixtures between both of those. And that's how I structured every one of the columns. Just if you're curious about doing this yourself, you have some frame of reference for the process there. But anyway, that's kind of a quick little update on my sort of projects that I've been working on. Let's go ahead and get into the portfolio of paintings now. So we can go ahead and move over to my website here. Let me just see if I can adjust some of my windows before I make a few other announcements. So really quickly, if you're watching this live or as a recording, I just want to reiterate a couple of workshops that I have scheduled this year. I'm trying to also be better about promoting events and opportunities that I'm a part of, whether it's an independent thing or some sort of a collaboration with an organization or a gallery or something like that. But just if you're curious, depending on where you live, if you want to take a look at my schedule for workshops, I have a page on my website called Teaching. You can find my schedule for my calendar year of workshops and teaching opportunities. So all of those are laid out here with links that'll take you directly to the landing page for the workshop, where you can find the material list, the tuition fee. You can find details on the organization that's running the event. You can find more of a itinerary of what you'd be doing in the workshop. All of those details will be linked under these underlined titles, so you can find everything there if you're curious. And then if you also just want to look around and see some feedback that I've received over the years from other past teaching opportunities, I've been collecting testimonials from students that I've had. You can find some of those here. And then I do have a material list of things that I like to use frequently, especially for plein air painting. So this little paperclip symbol is the direct link for a PDF that's free. You can just go on and download that and look at things like my easel setup and my palette and all of that good stuff. So anyway, that's a little plug on workshops. And then really quickly, just another kind of reminder. Some of you have heard this before, but I've been releasing these books of little like photo kind of journals of plein air work, kind of like a mini coffee table book of paintings that I've made outdoors on location. They're an annual publication that I've started. So I have 2 that are already published and available. The first one here is a really small book, so I call it a zine, and it's mostly photographs. This one is only $20, and then the second volume, which is about 3 or 4 times as long, is $30. And as you can see, it has a lot more text and commentary on my adventures in plein air and just more like process-based information. So volume 3, which is what I'm plugging at the moment here, is going to be coming out in the next month or so. I'm just over the halfway mark with designing the pages. I'm juggling a couple different responsibilities right now, and it's also tax season, so I'm itemizing my taxes and doing all that stuff too. And I'm trying to get this 3rd volume out as fast as possible. But being a one-man art business, there's a lot of hats I'm wearing at the moment. So if you're interested, the 3rd volume is still open for the pre-order, and it's on sale for $25. This one is going to be a similar size in length to the 2nd volume, and everything is the same size in terms of the dimensions of the book. But if you pre-order it now, you can save $5 and get it for $25, not including shipping. or you can pay the full $30 and back the zine, which means that your name will be featured in the back end of the book as a supporter of the project. So kind of along these back pages, I'll make sure to include people who backed the zine. So it's a fun way to share a little bit of the tribe that I've been fortunate to get to meet over the years. If you have any questions about my shop and some of that stuff, feel free to reach out or leave a comment on this video. All right, let's go ahead and get to the actual substance of today's live stream, which is going to be talking about my earlier plein air work. Again, part of the reason I'm doing these live streams is to go back and rewind the clock and just sort of talk about the journey that has taken me to this point that I'm currently at right now. Just for anyone who's interested and maybe is new to my art practice and would like to know more information about, my education and past experiences as a painter. So I'm hoping that these videos will be a really ideal format and way to bring people into my process and how it's developed over the years. So let's go ahead and take a look at this new portfolio that I just put up on my website today. So I really like this format of having categories for my portfolio. So I have sketchbooks, murals, plein air, studio, commissions. So now if you click on the plein air tab, it'll take you to two options. So you can see my current, more recent work and then the archive. So right now there's just two portfolios. I might end up sort of building those into subcategories, but we'll see how much time that will take. So for now, I have this archive portfolio, which I'll read this quick little paragraph here. So it says, here is a selection of plein air paintings made between 2018 to 2013. The reason I formatted the years like that is because at the top of the page, you're looking at paintings from 2018, and you're going to work your way back in time to 2013 as you scroll down the portfolio. During that time, I lived in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Then after a bicycle tour, I lived with my wife and in-laws in Queen Creek, Arizona. So there's paintings from Arizona in here. A few of the paintings were made in Brighton, Wisconsin, which is where I grew up, and the Lansing, Michigan area, which is where I was living for graduate school. So this body of work really spans 3 or 4 different locations and regions, which is really cool to be able to share. Most of the paintings were made with oils on canvas, paper, or wood panels. Some of the paintings are made with watercolor or gouache on paper. There are also a few pastel and charcoal drawings that are here as well. The paintings are untitled without details at the moment until I can source that information and those details. Some of, wait, I'm jumping ahead here. The image quality for these paintings is fairly low because a hard drive that I used to have crashed back in 2017, or maybe it was 2016. And I lost a lot of my undergraduate portfolio and just imagery that I had within the first year of graduating from Stevens Point. So I still have the hard drive, and I think that it's possible to take it into like a Best Buy or a tech company and have it, reclaimed for the files. But when I looked into it, it was like $800. So I'm saving my pennies until that's something I want to do. I have versions of a lot of the portfolio, but they're just very compressed, low resolution files. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of these images are from. So we'll work with what we have. Let's see. Some of the drawings and paintings were made in the studio from photographs. Just as a disclaimer, I'll try my best to mention that as we move through the portfolio. However, in the vein of landscape subject matter, to me, it just made sense to put those images and those paintings in this portfolio, just because there's more of a consistency of subject matter and process and just interest at the time. Some of the paintings are in private collections, but if you would like to inquire about the availability of one of the paintings, please contact me directly. I still have, I think, most of these paintings that have not been sold, and I think some of them are framed, some of them are unframed. So again, if you're interested, let me know, hit me up. We can talk about some pricing and figure out those details if it's something you're serious about. And then the last sentence just says, it's been a beautiful and rewarding side to my practice since first encountering this art form back in 2013. So, I've debated and kind of gone back and forth over the years on, what I should be posting and sharing on my website as part of my portfolio. And, I go back and forth between really opening up the archive, as you could say, and showing everything I've made, versus really curating the best work and, maybe the more relevant paintings that I've made. But at this very moment, I think I'm leaning more towards just keep the door open and let people come in and view what I've made over the years. So that's kind of what this video is about. Now, that being said, I might change my mind in a year or two or later or earlier, and this part of my portfolio may be taken down. I don't know. I will probably leave this video up on YouTube regardless, so this will be a nice way to preserve some of these paintings. And again, the commentary of them. So let's go ahead and get started. This painting is from 2013. I believe this was from a photograph. And the reason I say that is because I did 2 or 3 paintings of this same exact view and composition. And I remember in undergrad, I used to bike around. I didn't have a car, so I used to bike around the city. It's not a very big city, fortunately, but I would bike from campus to my apartment to downtown, and I would bike out into the countryside, and I would take a lot of photos. Sometimes I would work from more of a plein air approach, but a lot of these earlier works are probably from photographs that I took around the area of the downtown kind of urban alleyway scenes, which were some of my favorite subjects to paint. And things like this were really eye-catching to me, these big shapes of cast shadows and just the very limestone and kind of red city brick of the buildings was really fun to incorporate palette-wise and color scheme-wise. So the blue sky against this maroon red, rusty red color, those color combinations were very satisfying to really push in some of these paintings. So this is with watercolor, and I want to say this is about 9 by 12 inches, maybe a little bit larger. You can see it's got some very loose shape abstraction happening. I really used to paint a lot with watercolor, actually, and I credit a lot of the ways I paint with oils to what I learned in watercolor. Excuse me. And one of the biggest benefits of working with watercolor was that I'm just going to take care of one thing really quickly here. I just wanted to make a quick little announcement that we are live at the moment. Just for anyone else who might be interested in tuning in, I thought I would share this. So thanks for letting me do that real quick. But anyway, I learned a lot through painting with watercolor. Whether that was working with washes and thinking about lost and found edges. When I started painting with oils, having all of this experience with watercolor really, to me, it translated perfectly into working with oils, because for 2 things. One, it was helpful to think in terms of layers and building a painting in layers. So with oil paint, you have to be kind of careful about the consistency of paint and how you're layering that in a painting. So it's always best to work in very thin layers, and then gradually increase the physicality in the body of the paint as you reach that top surface. One of the things you don't want to do is work with very thin paint as a final layer over thick paint. And that's because typically it's taking your thicker areas of paint a lot longer to dry. And as your paint is oxidizing and curing, it's shrinking. And if you have thin paint on top of that thick layer, the thick layer is still moving and shrinking. And that outer layer, if it's really thin, it's going to dry a lot faster. So you're going to have this stiff final coat that's going to crack as that lower level is shrinking. So, having that practice of working in thin, sort of transparent layers with watercolor, that translated really well when I started kind of painting with oils and blocking things in with washes in oils. The other reason why it was helpful is because I was really broke at the time as a college student. So I didn't have a lot of paint, and I would work in very thin layers, but I would build up these rich paintings through many, many layers of paint, and watercolor really helped me with that. So these paintings here are from 2014, it looks like, and I apologize for the order. Some of things might be out of order, but these are also Stevens Point paintings based off of photographs, and this is with gouache, I'm pretty sure, and like a ballpoint pen, which was a really fun combination to work with. And this is pretty small. I think this is probably around like 8 by 8 inches or so. I did a series of these paintings from photographs with gouache and pen, and it was a lot of fun. I kind of want to go back to this combination of materials because you have the best of both worlds. You have this wide range of paint application, especially if you're working with an opaque medium like gouache, which allows you to get really transparent like watercolor, and then you can work in more of an opaque manner and have more flat kind of color relationships that are really pure because you're working in a very opaque flat shape. And then on top of that, when it dries, you can go over it with pen and do these really satisfying thin gestural lines. So this is probably something I'll do when I go to Spain in July. So my wife and I have a trip for Spain scheduled. We were supposed to go back in 2020, but because of COVID, we lost our tickets, and sadly, we're not refunded. So we've taken a few years to kind of, prepare financially to go back now, or to go for the first time this summer in July. So this is probably the material combination I'll use when I'm painting in Spain. I'm very excited to go and see a lot of paintings that I've been studying through reproductions for years, and also just to explore the landscape and the architecture, and who knows, maybe I'll even run into my painting hero Antonio Lopez Garcia. I'm holding out for the universe to somehow put us in the same place at the same time. Although I don't speak Spanish, that would be very helpful to have that skill. Anyway, back to the work. This is probably about 5 by 5 inches. This one and the last one are both kind of smaller. Also 2014, I think also from a photograph. This is when I was really in love with architecture and shapes and thinking about buildings as flat, dynamic, geometric shapes. Even though they have angles from perspective, the variety in their shapes is really what was satisfying to me at this time, and thinking about composition of lines versus shapes versus tonal variety from dark to light value shifts that were happening. It was really satisfying. And now here we have a painting, I think it's from 2015. I thought it was from 2014, but this is a little bit later. This was made during a plein air summer class that I was in, that I took two summers in a row. So my painting professor as an undergrad, I had two of them. One of them, Diane Bywaters, who's an amazing painter, an amazing teacher, and has just become a really generous role model and teacher and friend. Since I've graduated from Stevens Point, she's been one of my first really big supporters in things with, building my career as an artist, and, her confidence in my work. It's helped me, since the beginning of those moments. So since 2012, I think was when I first had a class with her. And she became kind of my major professor as an undergrad student. So she taught this summer plein air class, which was a month-long, maybe a little bit longer, maybe like a 6-week course where you would meet with the class, I think like 4 days a week, and for like 3 hours to 6 hours a day. So it was this really time-intensive, almost like plein air summer camp kind of class. And it was really fun because, you're outside in Wisconsin in the summer, you're painting, you're talking about painting, you're practicing painting, you're looking at a lot of paintings. So it was this like beautiful and super gratifying pressure cooker of a plein air practice. And I'm really glad that I was able to take that class. as an undergrad student when I was still kind of early in my painting career, because I took a lot of life drawing classes as an undergrad student too, and this was a really great way to complement what I was practicing with the figure. And I was using a lot of the same techniques and a lot of the same methods of abstraction and representation, just applying it outdoors in natural light scenes like this. So both of these two paintings are, I think, probably 11 by 14 inches or 9 by 12. And they're both with oils on kind of a store-bought canvas panel. And they were both made in, I think it's the main park off of the river, where the skate park is in Stevens Point. I don't remember the name of it right now, but there's this little channel of water with a couple bridges, or at least this one bridge that I had painted. I really liked this spot and this view. But one of the things I remember being influenced by early in my career and like as a student was this book that I think my grandmother gave me on Van Gogh and some of his paintings and drawings. And I remember seeing a drawing that he did when he was like 12 years old or something, like a young kid still. And it was this drawing of a bridge that looked kind of like this almost, the lower part, not the yellow, handrail, but just the stone and concrete kind of construction. And little spots like this always would remind me of that drawing I saw of Van Gogh and just how incredible of a drawing it was. But anyway, this is also during that same class. I forget the name of the park we were at. I think it was it's on the Ice Age Trail in central Wisconsin. The Dells of the Eau Claire River, I think, actually is the location in the park where we would go and paint for a weekend. And that was a lot of fun because as a painter, it's kind of like this big playground. There's a ton of these huge boulders and cliff sides. The river is obviously there. So it's really satisfying to find these interesting shapes and color properties to paint. And what I like about some of those paintings that I made is that they're very active. You're trying to study the movement of the water and just that like active shape and active line, and how do you convey movement in paint. So it was this really great space to explore edge quality, right? And things that were sharper versus softer, and this use of blending and combining shapes together. It was a lot of fun to work on that. And I think this is on a like masonite panel that's 10 by 10 inches or so, also with oils. And it was partially this view that you can kind of see on the left here. So those rocks were part of the composition that I painted. And it was a very dark painting in general, but this lighting, this sort of backlit photo that I took is not helping us see a lot of the saturation and the chroma that was in this painting. And I'm not sure what happened to this painting. I don't know if I still have this, or if it's sold, or if it was painted over. Now we're kind of jumping around again a little bit here, so I apologize. But in 2014, in the summer, I was invited to do a solo show at a very small but very mature professional space, this museum called Scarabocchio Art Museum in downtown Stevens Point. And it was a space that a few art students had exhibited their work at in solo shows. So I knew that it was a space that would invite art students from the university to show their work. And I remember getting invited by Brian Borchardt, who at the time was I think the curator and the director of the gallery. And he received a business card that I had left with an intern, and looked at my portfolio online and invited me to do a show of paintings. And I remember with Diane Bywaters kind of coming up with this idea to do a show of local spaces and subjects and the architecture and the landscape. And it was a lot of fun. It was good. At the time, I think that was a really good format and structure for me to focus and really just create a somewhat cohesive body of paintings. So I probably had like 30 or 40 paintings that I showed. A lot of them were small and very modest in scale. So like these two paintings that I'm showing right now are made with oil paint on Arches oil paper. Again, I think these are like 9 by 12 or 11 by maybe 11 by 14 in their scale. And these were painted in 2014. So leading up to that exhibition, I was using a lot of palette knife application here, really pushing the abstraction of the shapes in the views. Most of these also are from photographs. So, I have these in my plein air portfolio, but they're not actually plein air, some of these paintings. It's hard because they're so related, in subject matter and in the location of where these subjects exist. So this is the Elbow Room bar in Stevens Point, and obviously it's like this front, sort of head-on view of the front of the building. If you've ever been to Stevens Point, Wisconsin, you've maybe seen the square downtown, which is probably about 75% pubs and bars and restaurants. So, it's a small college town in central Wisconsin, and they definitely, have done a very good job of supplying college students with places to go out and spend their weekends and their money on socializing in bars, which was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I got to go to school in Stevens Point and experience the culture and get to know some of the community members through the art organizations and through this exhibition. And I have to thank Diane again, because she also gave me the idea for the title of the show, which was, I think I called it Stevens Point, A Portrait of Place, which was really, that was her title. And I totally stole that from her. And I still feel kind of guilty about that to this day, because she had suggested it kind of in passing. I don't know if it was something that she really wanted me to just sort of take. So I feel bad about that, but it was a great title, and I have to give her the credit on the title. But anyway, those are a couple of paintings on oil paper. This was also in the exhibition. This is on a piece of brown, like butcher paper, and as a student, we used to have these rolls of brown, just sort of craft paper, butcher paper, and especially in the life drawing classrooms and studios, so you could do gestures and warm-up work on this paper, and I kind of fell in love with the color and the value and the tone of the paper in those drawing classes. And I would go in there and I would rip pieces off and just roll them up and then paint on them or draw on them from photos and other compositions. So again, this is that same viewpoint from that first watercolor painting that I showed, and this was made with various pastel drawing tools, and I think even a little bit of acrylic or gouache paint. So some of these white shapes are made with paint. I think this red tail light is made with paint. Otherwise, a lot of it is charcoal and pastel. But I miss working this way, kind of in this hybrid dry, wet medium. Working with oils now, you don't really have as many opportunities to work directly on unprimed paper. And I miss the possibilities of combining pastel and charcoal with paint, and just opening that range of opacity and transparency. So what was a lot of fun was just gently scraping charcoal or pastel on the paper to create these areas of noise and texture that obviously it doesn't feel solid, right? So you end up with this shape that's very textural and very sort of fractured and fragmented. And to me, that read more effectively as like a stone wall or this really like aged, gritty piece of architecture. My other favorite area is this big triangle shape here where the sun is really beaming down on the side of the building. And I was starting to really notice the subtle contrasts of light in areas of shadow versus areas that are in direct sunlight. So one of the things that I remember being kind of an aha moment for me was really paying attention to the value difference of the framework of a window when it's in sunlight versus in shadow, and just the value shift that happens. Even though it's the same material, it's the same paint, it just, one of them is is reflecting direct sunlight, so it has a much brighter, warmer kind of quality in its color. So that was a very satisfying area. For me, there's definitely moments in this drawing where I'm like, oof, I really should have taken my time and corrected some of the perspective, like the top of this building. It was kind of a complex, sense of perspective that I should have probably avoided altogether or simplified in some way, because this building has like 3 cascading heights as you move down this one wall. So that was kind of tricky to kind of convey. Also, the angle of the whole wall probably needs to be foreshortened a little bit more. I think this line needs to come over to the left, so it's more of a direct channel. But fortunately, I think there's enough going on in the rest of the drawing that it's not the main part that you're going to look at. So I was able to kind of squeak by some of those inaccuracies. And, again, what I also really enjoyed about this drawing was the composition of foreshortening and stacking of subject matter. So we have this back of a van or a car in the foreground that's this kind of big abstract shape with one little bright red moment, which for me was very satisfying to build up this drawing kind of in a somewhat subdued manner, and then start to pop in these shapes of high chroma to convey the sense of light and light versus shadow. So this tail light was really satisfying to pop in at the end. And some of that, again, is coming from being influenced by watercolor painters. So when I was painting with watercolor a lot, I remember learning a lot from YouTube videos as a college student, in conjunction with what I was doing in school. And just checking to see if my dog was around. And I remember with YouTube, I used to watch these like 2 or 3 minute videos that were trailers for painting tutorial videos that were like hour-long videos. But, on YouTube, you could only find these little trailers at the time. A lot of them were for streamline videos. I remember Alvaro Castanet or Castanet, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I think he's from Spain, and but I could be totally off. I'm not sure. But anyway, him and Joseph Zabuvacek, I think is how you say his last name. They were 2 artists that were doing watercolors at the time, and had some trailer videos where I would rewatch the videos over and over and over, and I would pause the videos when it would show their paintings and their palettes and paintings in progress. And that was a way for me to learn other approaches for painting architecture or painting the landscape, and thinking about abstraction and representation, and also watching the speed and frequency at which they were making their paintings was really eye-opening for me at the time, because it gave me an example of a frequency that you could work at, right? And you don't have to work very carefully and slowly all the time. You can really push things into high gear, and that might lead to some really interesting results. So having that background as well informed the way I was drawing at the time too, and allowing myself to push more of the abstraction and to really push some of the simplification and reduction of form opened up a lot of really fun and exciting avenues for representation at the time. So this is from, I think, 2014. Yeah, it looks like that's the year I have on here. Again, I wish I had a better image so you could really see some of the contrasts in both value but in color properties as well. But this is of the Fox Theater, which is downtown in Stevens Point. While I was living there, it was out of service. I think it might still be in a state of transformation. I think the city and the various groups in Stevens Point have been trying to renovate and refurbish and fix up the Fox Theater and really bring it back to life. But I've heard that it's been a project that's hit multiple challenges and hiccups. So it was something that I really loved to, hey Gigi, how's it going? It was something I really loved to paint at the time and draw at the time because it had such a unique character to the qualities of the text and the sign and the shapes, and it really stood out as a subject to paint in Stevens Point. So some of the paintings of the Fox Theater and drawings that I have in the portfolio were made on location from observation, but a lot of them were made from photographs that I took, and then I would draw or paint in the studio in the NFAC in Stevens Point. But it was fun to start to play with what some people call alien color, which is this idea that when you have a painting that is somewhat uniform and cohesive in terms of its color palette, if you pop in one very different and distinct hue or color that's different from the rest of that color scheme, it's going to really stand out because it's different, right? So what you can do then compositionally is drop in these moments of alien color to lead the eye throughout the composition. And that was something I was really practicing and incorporating in some of these mixed media drawings with paint. So I think the blue turquoise is actually with acrylic paint. And for a while there, that was a pretty consistent combination of materials. I would work with charcoal, pastel, ink. Like I think some of this down here is actually India ink, white charcoal pencil. That's how I signed my name. I think that's where some of these lines are drawn with, and then acrylic paint. So it was really kind of a smorgasbord of materials and media, but it led to some really interesting and varied surface qualities that like I said earlier, I kind of miss having access to these dry edges that give you these beautiful atmospheric qualities in your drawings and paintings. So who knows, maybe I'll try to get back into some pastel work this year. It's also nice to be able to travel without carrying wet paintings and dealing with, solvents and some of that stuff. So that's another, reason to go back to working with pastels, or at the very least this kind of like mixed media solvent-free process. So this was from a photograph of a farm just outside of Stevens Point. I remember I lived in an apartment near the Village Apartments, and there was an intersection off of, I don't remember the names of the streets now, but near Spash, the high school. I remember I would bike down a road, or maybe now I can't remember which road this was off of. I want to say it was close to the high school and kind of that big intersection there. I used to bike down these backcountry roads, and I had this really fun route that I would do on my old road bike that used to be my uncle's. That was actually the bike in that one painting I showed earlier from the plein air class. But anyway, that was how I got around, and I used to bike down this road, and I loved the combination of shapes and buildings and farm equipment that this one particular farm kept during these years of like 2013 to 2015. So I used to bike over here and take photos. I did a few plein air paintings that were small, kind of like sketchbook studies of this view as well. But this was from a photograph in the studio, and same combination of materials here. What I really loved about this particular drawing, which I think sold during that show that I mentioned at the Scarbocchio Museum, which was, I'll talk about in a second. That was a really pivotal moment for me in kind of finding some confidence, finding my voice, feeling like I could trust that, maybe it's possible to sell your work as an artist. Gigi also went to school in Stevens Point, so we're both Pointers, UWSP alums, and we lived in some of the same areas, which is so funny. But we didn't know each other in school, which is hilarious. And then we met at a plein air show in Mineral Point 2 years ago. So it's been really fun to also find these invisible threads that connect everyone together, and be able to share some of our experiences from different phases in our lives. So I really miss living in Stevens Point. It was a really great place to live as a college student and as an artist. It's a very supportive arts community. There were a lot of opportunities for up-and-coming artists at that time, and that exhibition at the Scarbocchio Museum, like I was saying, it gave me a lot of confidence as an art student to trust myself and to really, keep pushing my work and my process and continue to look for, bigger, more challenging goals as an artist. So it was a lot of fun. As Gigi is saying, it was a very special time and place to experience. But this was one of the paintings I think that sold in that show. And, a lot of the work I exhibited, this was another painting in that show, painted from a photograph of the downtown bus route kind of system. This is close to one of the coffee shops. I don't remember the name of this coffee shop now, but it's also by Gallery Q, kind of in that same area. And I took some photos. When I would go downtown, I would always be taking some photos just with my phone. And, they're very low resolution pictures, which I think in a lot of ways is actually better if you're painting from photographs, because you're not comparing your paintings to something that's so crystal clear with details. And, you're kind of given a little bit more freedom to suggest things when you're working from a more pixelated image. At least that's my experience. So I think that lent itself well to these more abstract and gestural paintings, where I'm working with a lot of palette knife and letting things sort of dissolve into big, open, atmospheric passages of the paintings. Again, I wish I had a better file. I wish my hard drive that I used back in 2017 was still with me, but it crashed. So I have to figure out some of those files. But anyway, this was in the show. I think this painting also sold in the show. This was on Arch's oil paper, which was fun. I think part of doing all of those pastel mixed media drawings on unprimed paper really led me to, try out some other substrates and surfaces, because I wanted to have marks that felt more kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of grippy, if that makes sense. Like I wanted the paint to kind of stick to the surface in a different way. And working on acrylic gesso, a lot of times your paint really glides. And when you make a mark, when you lift off your brush or your palette knife, a lot of times, for me anyway, the paint would be very clean on that edge. And I always was trying to push the textural possibilities of oil paint. So I found some really nice results with the Arch's oil paper at this time. This was also, I think, 2014 in preparation for that show. I'm going and reading the chat real quick. It's really nice that Jane and Gigi, and I think even, I don't know if Gigi and Steven Wysocki have met yet, but these are all some of my favorite artists that I've gotten to meet, and friends I've gotten to meet through the Plein Air sort of circuit here in Wisconsin. And it's been really fun to get to know these three folks. So if you're watching this in the recording, definitely go check out Steven Wysocki and Green Goodies, or Gigi, on Instagram, social media, and Jane Shank as well. So they're all artists who also like to paint in plein air, and I think all of us work with oils and maybe other mediums too. So it's fun to go back and look at some of these earlier paintings from college that incorporate other mediums that I used to use a lot more frequently. Like this is an oil painting on Arch's paper, but it's oil paint on top of a line drawing with pen. So if we look closely, you can kind of see some of that line work here. And this is of, like, people would call it like the Red Castle house, which when I was in school in 2014, around that time, I think it was partially like occupied by residents, but I was never quite sure what the situation was with housing at this really unique building, which is right off of the downtown street, kind of when you're coming off of, I think, Division onto Main Street. It's in that line of streets there. But I painted this view of the building, I think, once or twice. And again, this is probably from a photograph, not from direct observation. So I'm misleading everyone here thinking that these are all plein air paintings, but they're actually studio paintings. And as you can tell, they're pretty fast. Like the shapes, the drips, the kind of immediacy of the marks really reveals how quickly I was working on some of these paintings. And Again, I think part of it was that I was still somewhat new to oil painting at this time. I'd maybe been working with it for about a year and a half at that point. And a lot of my methods that I'd picked up through watercolor were still kind of fresh in my process. So I was working with a lot of washes as my block in. Obviously, I used a lot of mineral spirits because we're getting these really thin drips of paint through some of these layers, which is also pretty satisfying. I kind of wish I still worked this fluidly in terms of the consistency of paint, because you can get these really interesting overlaps of mark and shape that are somewhat accidental. But yeah, exactly, Jane. It was sort of like I was using oils much like a watercolor medium. And earlier, I don't know if you caught this comment earlier, but part of that was just out of a financial, requirement. I didn't have the funds to keep buying a lot of paint, so I was thinning out my paint to make it last as long as possible. And it's funny how sometimes we make work for certain reasons or in a certain way out of necessity that has nothing to do with like, oh, I just want to make a painting that looks this way. It's from a different reason or from a different influence. Like for me, it's like I just want to have enough paint to make another painting and then another painting. So I'm going to thin everything out and work in these very thin layers. But looking back now, I think I learned a lot more about oil painting by really thinning out the paint, because one of the main things I hear from students and people that are interested in painting with oils is that if they've tried it and they didn't like it or they were frustrated, it's usually because it got muddy really quickly. And what I've started to remember to share with people is that a lot of times it's because you're using too much paint, right? And the paint is taking so long to dry that if you're used to painting with acrylic or any sort of water-based paint, usually the paint is going to dry fast enough where you can continue to layer and layer and layer, and you're not dealing with wet paint on those layers as often or as frequently. Now, that doesn't mean that acrylic paint can't be open and extended with different mediums and stay wet in between layers. It just means that it's going to dry a lot faster. So if you're used to that consistency and speed of acrylic, oils is going to feel like a totally different process. And for me, having worked with watercolor and acrylics, thinning out my oil paint really allowed the layers to dry a lot faster, and I was able to kind of find my way into working with oils that I felt like I had more control over the process, and I wasn't battling this like muddiness or the challenge of working with too much paint on the surface. So again, looking back now, it makes more sense to have had some of those accidental lessons just by way of saving money, right? That was sort of how I came to that process. And then over time, I was looking at more and more painters and paintings, and I was getting more interested in like the viscosity of paint. And I wanted areas to feel more present and heavy and physical. And, when I was able to purchase more and more paint over the years, that's when I started to incorporate more of these like varied surface qualities and texture and paint quality in terms of its viscosity. And then this is this is a painting of a barbershop, obviously. Also in Stevens Point, this was in my exhibition at the Scarbocchio Museum. I think somebody purchased this painting too, but I'm not positive now actually if I have this or not. But what I liked about this painting was trying to convey the glowing neon colors from the sign, and trying to, this is one of the first sort of examples, I think, of painting windows and why I've been enjoying painting windows as a subject, because regardless of the time of day, most of the time you can see through a window of a building, and you're getting this reflection and this reveal of an interior space that's compressed on a glass sort of matrix or glass filter of material. And this was one of the first paintings, I think, where I started to notice the excitement of showing the inside and the outside at the same time, because we have the barbershop sign on the outside, illuminating the frame of the window, and then at least I think it was on the outside, maybe it was on the inside of the window. And then there's the open sign that is turned off, but we can still see moments of it from the barbershop sign. So if you're familiar with some of my plein air work, then you've probably noticed this theme of painting windows. And those are some of the first reasons why I think I was drawn to painting windows. This is the elbow room again at night. This is a nocturne painting, obviously. And what I liked about this one is that a lot of the information is totally like not washed out, but totally grouped and reduced, right? So there's aspects of the architecture here that, you know, you're seeing part of the metal framework for the hanging sign. There's this window on the second floor that's partially illuminated. I really liked simplifying some of their other signs in the corner, and then also trying to convey the warmth and the glow of the neon lights that surround their main sign. This was painted from a photograph as well. This is a winter setting, so there's a little snowbank here on the right side that's catching some of that reflected light as well. And one of my best friends from college and roommates, Dylan Bay, who was also an art student in the graphic design program, actually bought this painting, I remember, I think after my show, because it didn't sell in the show, and I had it for a little while after that, but then he ended up purchasing the painting, which is really cool. It's always nice to know where the paintings are and who has them, and you know, the painting then starts to symbolize the relationship that I've been lucky enough to find with those people. And that was with oils as well. Even though it has a very flat surface quality, it almost looks like it could have been acrylic, but you know, my quality of oil paint has taken a long time to get to more you know, high quality tinting strength paints. So a lot of these paintings were made with student grade paint, which, you know, it's not like a huge deal, but you'll probably notice more recently my paintings have got a lot more of a punch and more of a sense of chroma because of the quality of the paint that I've been using the last like maybe 6 or 7 years now. This is from Forest Park, Illinois. My wife Megan has some family friends who own a little boutique shop down in Forest Park, and I remember we went there. I forget why we went there, but it was for their shop. There was something going on with their shop, some kind of event, and we drove down in 2014, and I was still a student at the time, so I was doing a lot of plein air painting. I think this was also in the summer, so this was probably before or after the first plein air summer class that I took. So plein air painting was really fresh in my practice at this time, and I wanted to do more and more plein air painting, so I brought some of the oil paper from Arches down with me and did this oil painting on the sidewalk. And this is from plein air, or you know, from observation. So obviously buildings and architecture have been an interest for me when painting outdoors for a really long time. You know, Hopper is a really early influence for me. You know, obviously that's going to be pretty noticeable through a lot of the architectural paintings, but you know, I fell in love with his paintings. I think Diane Bywaters also recommended him to me when I was still in school to, you know, as someone to look at. And you know, it was fun to look at books of his work and just see like what you could do with an inanimate subject like a building, and how you could personalize or embed a sense of character or, you know, very human emotion into an architectural space. And when I was looking through books of Hopper's paintings, that's really what stood out to me, was how he would use light in kind of a cinematic way to tell a story and to set up a scene and to really think about things like drama and emotion and character of a building. So when I was looking at his work, that was something I wanted to kind of push more in paintings that I was making. And again, here's another Fox Theater painting. This was from plein air. I remember painting this because it was kind of an overcast, not rainy day, but it was very misty. And I remember I was painting this kind of out in the open without an umbrella. And something I was doing a lot at this time too was, obviously I was doing a lot of washes with oil paint, but I remember I would take my brushes and dip them in the solvent and just sort of tap the brush over my panels and canvases. It was a technique that I saw in the work of a California artist, I think an Oakland-based artist. He's now, I don't know if he's in California anymore, but his name is John Wentz. And I was really influenced by his paintings when I was in school. And what I really loved about his work was the variety of the marks, the variety of the paint handling. He was another artist that was really pushing the diversity of the paint, right? So we'd have these really beautiful washes of transparent paint, and then these really thick, opaque moments. And there was this really kind of energetic paint handling and paint application in some of his work. And he was an example of somebody that definitely opened up my definitions of paint language, right? And it's almost like when you sing a song, you can sing a song in so many different styles and through so many different characteristics of sound. Painting is very similar, where you can create the image with all of these different nuances and differences, and find a sense of character and quality that really pushes those Hopper qualities, right? Pushing the character or the emotion that maybe you want to convey in the work. But I'm noticing that Gigi just asked Jane what her Instagram is. So yeah, if the three of you or whoever is in the chat, if you want to put in your websites or your Instagram handles, feel free to do that, just because I think all of that should be saved in the recording of the video. I'm hoping that it is, but if not, I can also mention those during the stream. Here's another Fox Theater painting. This one was from a photograph, though. I remember painting this one in layers. I was doing a lot of glazing at the time, and this is on a piece of, I think this is on a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that was primed and gessoed. I remember as a college student, I used to just raid the wood shop for scraps, and there was a recycling center behind the theater department in the NFAC. So if you're not familiar with Stevens Point's campus, the arts building is this really big, relatively new building. It's a beautiful building, and I think it was built maybe in the 80s or 90s. And one of my favorite things about the architecture of the building is that there's this really big courtyard in the center of the building, and there's 4 different departments of arts that all share the building. So we had studio art on one end, you had dance in one area, theater and dance were kind of in the same part of the building, and then you had the music department on the second floor. So the nice thing about the courtyard was that you had this oval, really big balcony that overlooked the courtyard. So it was this perfectly designed space for a creative community of students and professors, because it felt like everyone shared that space, and the openness of the building, it made it really inclusive. So when I would walk to my art classes, I would hear musicians practicing, I would hear people dancing, I would hear actors rehearsing their lines, and you would be inspired and invigorated by the energy and that sense of progress that the building really encapsulated. So what I'm trying to get back to is the fact that I also benefited from things like the theater stage crew was also in the same building, and I could walk 100 feet away and find their big dumpster of scrap wood and scrap materials where they were discarding extra building materials for their stages and their props. So I would go and find big pieces of wood that I would have the wood shop cut down, and then I would prime them. So I really took advantage of a lot of those resources as a college art student, and I remember painting on pieces of scrap wood like this. So what I was going to say, though, about this particular painting that I really liked is that this was one of the first times I remember really trying out glazing. And this like Renaissance, Italian Renaissance way of painting where you're working in very thin, translucent layers of paint, or transparent layers of paint, where you're building up the volume and the illusion of form in this very slow and kind of tedious process. So what's nice about that is that it allows you to make these very subtle adjustments in your paintings through these thin layers of color. And it's an indirect way of painting. So if you're a painter, there's two ways to paint. You can paint either directly, which is like everything is just applying on the surface, and you're not letting the paint dry before you're adding more and more marks and shapes and paint. Or if you work indirectly, that's kind of like this, where you make a layer and then you let it dry and then you paint over that layer. And glazing is probably the most popular way of indirect painting. So this was a fairly small, maybe like a 9x11 size panel of, again, I think plywood that was gessoed. And what I liked about this panel is that it was really thick. It was either 3/4 inch thick or 1 inch thick. I remember it just feeling very solid. And there was something very satisfying about glazing and building up this image on a very solid piece of wood. And anyway, it was a very eye-opening painting. I look at it now and it's totally skewed in a lot of places with the perspective, but it's not the end of the world. You can kind of just look at things and go, there's a lot that I learned and there's a lot that I'm still learning and there's a lot I wish I could fix, but you know what? That's part of the journey. That's part of this entire process of being an artist. It isn't to make a perfect painting every single time. It's about the journey, and it's about, small steps of success and learning and hopefully being surprised by the process too. So this is another Fox Theater painting, as you can see. This one was really big. I think this canvas was donated to the department, and I think somehow it was given to me from a professor or another student who didn't want it. And I had it for a few months before I was like, maybe I'll try to do a big Fox Theater image on this canvas. And this was one of the last paintings I think I made prior to my show at the Scarbocchio Museum in 2014. And I painted this in the painting studio on campus from photographs, and it was really fun. This was one of the times when I really was trying to let go of details and let go of over rendering and living with a more reduced way of depicting something. So a lot of these small bits of architecture are really kind of gestural and kind of loose and sketchy and really immediate. And what I liked about having that as a foundation for the painting is then I could go and kind of carve out some more rendered areas of volume and architecture and detail. So there was this interesting sense of contrast and representation happening here, just in the level of information. But again, this panel was probably about, I would say, 30 inches by 46 or 48, somewhere kind of in there, maybe 45. And so it was a pretty big size canvas, especially for me at the time. I was working fairly modestly. And the painting was in the show. It did not sell. And I had it for maybe about a year or two after that show before I decided that I would just donate it to the group that was trying to renovate the Fox Theater, and they could use it as like a giveaway, raffle item or, some sort of a fundraiser piece of artwork. And that's the last I've heard of the painting. I don't know where it is now. I don't know who has it. I don't know if it was ever used for a fundraising opportunity, but it was a lot of fun to just to work on it and to allow some new methods and new ideas to emerge in the process. And now here we have other paintings, I think from 2014 as well, but I'm not finding signatures on some of these. This painting here, I don't know if there's more to this painting, like if I continued working on this past this point, but it's pretty close to, I think, the final look of the painting. And This is on a small 8x10 canvas, I think from Michaels. I used to get a lot of canvases and frames from Michaels just because they were cheaper and really accessible, and my woodworking skills at the time were very, very, very minimal and subpar. And the few frames that I tried to make as an undergrad student had more nails sticking out of them than actual pieces of wood. So if that tells you anything, I prefer to just go out and buy canvases, especially because I was still a student and I was still learning at this time. It made sense to work with more affordable materials. But anyway, this is from a photograph of a motel sign that is on the corner of the street that I grew up on in Brighton, Wisconsin. So I used to live on NN, County Road NN, and that ran into Highway 45, which is a very long highway that runs through the north and south, east side of Wisconsin. And that intersection is where this little motel is, and their sign is really, I always thought it was a really interesting and cool looking sign. So one of the times I was home as a college student, I took photos of the sign and I was like, I'm going to paint that, and made this little 8x10 inch oil painting. And what I liked about the paintings that I was making in this manner is that they incorporated a lot of glazes and washes of semi-transparent paint. And I was really interested in building this sense of atmosphere and this sense of space and depth in the paintings by obscuring or obfuscating information, basically like minimizing the details and pushing things. In my opinion, it feels like I'm pushing things back in space, right, behind these like veils of atmosphere. And then what was really fun was to go back and recarve out details and shapes. And this was a technique that I saw in painters like John Wentz and some of his paintings. There was another California painter that I was really into at the time. What's his name? I want to say Ben something, but I don't think it's Ben. Man, this is going to really bother me. Hopefully I can think of his name later on. But he was a painter that he made a lot of paintings that had these kind of washy, atmospheric effects and layers. And, I think I've always been an artist that allowed myself to kind of copy and mimic what people were doing and trying it out. It's sort of like seeing if the shoe fits and, pulling bits and pieces of influences in process and material and composition and color choices, and seeing what I could do with it, and sometimes it was from painters that were contemporary, sometimes from modern painters, sometimes from historical painters. But what I like about talking about this is that it's a way to normalize the process of influence and inspiration. And there seems to be this sort of fetish nowadays in painting and art making where, the more original you seem or are perceived to be, the more valuable your work is, or the more significant your work is. And I don't know if that's totally true. I think there's always a line of influence and inspiration that we can trace back in artists' work. Gigi is asking if I sell those works or if I keep them for my studies. These ones I think all were sold. Like I know my wife's cousin Alyssa has this painting. This one I think I might have sold. It's hard to remember which ones were purchased or if they're ones I still have. But these are all 8x10 inch paintings, and I showed them for sale at one or two different events. I don't think that these were part of my show in Stevens Point, because a lot of these are painted from photographs of locations that are not in Stevens Point. Like this was a restaurant in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is about 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 20 minutes from where I grew up in Brighton. So I was there on a break from school and took some photos of different restaurants. And I was looking for interesting signs. Like I really wanted to paint sort of unique geometric signs of restaurants and businesses. So do I only paint from photos I've taken? For the most part, I think that was something I remember some of the faculty members in Stevens Point really kind of pushing us to make a habit of taking our own reference photos and not just sourcing things from the internet or from books or catalogs. And yeah, the thing that really stood out about doing that is that it gave me this really kind of inherent personal connection to the imagery. You know, if I took the photo, it's like, well, I was there. I stood in that place. I documented the photo. It's my moment from my life that I'm going to then paint from. So I could really see why they were pushing us to do that. I mean, that was one reason. I think another reason is that it makes the painting a little bit more intentional then, I think, too, because you're starting with a blank template as your reference. By taking the photo yourself, you're already starting to compose and position and think about perspective and scale and some of those qualities when you're taking the photo. And so for me, I think it was a really good thing that was sort of pushed pretty early on. And I think I'm going to generalize and say that all of the paintings in this portfolio are from either plein air or from photos that I took myself. So these are all from photos that I took myself in places near where I grew up. So this was a painting that was from a photo that I also took in not Lake Geneva, but in Kenosha, in downtown Kenosha. There's this old sign on top of like a 6-story building or 7-story building in downtown Kenosha by the harbor. And I thought it was an interesting sign. I liked the font style of the sign, the color palette. I thought it would be interesting to have this really open, big, washy area where the edges of forms are being broken by the washes. And, I look at it now and I'm like, it just feels a little bit cliche, or maybe this is a little bit of a trope, this sort of like brushy, breaking the edge of things. It just feels a little, I don't know, a little bit like a trope in painting. And I'm glad I tried it, and it was something I incorporated in some of these little 8x10 paintings, but obviously it was something that I really pushed maybe a little bit too heavily in some of these paintings. So, this is a very, I look at this and I'm kind of not into this look and feel, this sort of vignette effect. But again, I think the lesson for me when I look at this painting is that it's like, okay, this is the example of going too far, right? And using something as a gimmick and pushing something a little bit past, or a lot past a line where it's visually interesting, or because now it's sort of it's taking away from the actual purpose of this painting, which was depicting this trolley dog's hot dog stand in I'm reading Gigi's comment here. It's like a disconnect from the spaces. Yeah, I think so. It is sort of like this break in the representation and like the unity of the space. It feels like, almost like a fracturing or fragmenting of something. Let me see this other comment here. It's got Scooby-Doo cartoon vibes. For sure. Yeah, some of these definitely do have kind of an animation, kind of illustration, cartoony sort of feel to them. And I think some of that was just the way I was painting, obviously, but the like really illustrative style that I was working with at this time. And part of that, I think, is working from photos. When you have this static reference that, you don't have changing light, you don't have shifting color temperatures and values and movement of the space. You don't feel time, passing by as you're working on it. It gives the paintings to me more of a stiffness that I wasn't super satisfied with. And even now it's like, I'm not that satisfied with some of the paintings that are here. But again, I'm going to bring them in just to show the process and to show the journey. You found that issue with your portrait project. Yeah, I mean, it's hard working from photos to get that sense of life and that sense of variability and change. And I think when we work from photos, we have to find a way to create that for ourselves. And one of my favorite solutions to that problem is working from a video as opposed to a photo, and just looping a short video clip, because it gives you this sense of time and this sense of activity and movement, which is really nice. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, we both had the same thought right then. And really just a quick little side story here about this restaurant, Trolley Dogs, kind of a sentimental story. When I was a kid in middle school, like 7th grade, 8th grade, I remember my mom had a farm stand. It was like a Wednesday afternoon farm stand that was at this local park where we lived, and she registered our little farm as like a business, and we had eggs and vegetables and like small homegrown produce that we would sell pretty affordably, given like that it's organic and homegrown. And I remember there were other vendors that would come every week, and there was probably about 7 or 8 tables that were like kind of consistent vendors for the spring and early summer weeks that I would go. And it was my grandmother and I who would go and set up the table and sell the produce. And I remember I would sit and play my guitar and practice my guitar because I was really into that in like 8th grade and 9th grade. So maybe it was into high school actually. But anyway, there was a gentleman there who would bring a little mobile hot dog cart, and he had one of these like Vienna sausage sort of umbrellas, and it was the owner of this restaurant, Trolley Dogs. And I remember my favorite thing about doing those Wednesday afternoon farmers markets, there were a couple things. Obviously, getting to spend some time with my grandmother was a lot of fun. She's really fun to talk with and hang out with. And she would buy me some soup from this restaurant that was across the street, not Trolley Dogs, but this little diner. And they always had Mexican tortilla soup on Wednesdays. And I still think about that soup and crave that soup. But I would get a cup of the soup, and then I would get a hot dog from the Trolley Dog guy. And it was like the perfect little afternoon lunch as a growing, young man. So when I look at this painting, that's what I think about, are those farmers markets. This is a painting from the side of a building, also from a photograph that I took. I want to say this might have been like in Kenosha, just driving. Like we were at a red light, and I remember, I don't know if it was my sister or my mom or my brother that was driving, and I just kind of, I was like taking photos as we were driving around Kenosha, and I think that's where this photo was taken. And this was a pretty cool little painting to make. This is, I think, 8 by 10 inches as well, and with oils on canvas. I really liked the abstraction and the looseness of the text, and some of the architectural shapes that are here. It has a very kind of washed out and gritty quality that I really like in this painting. But I'm glad that Gigi is also kind of into that blurred breaking of edges and the variety of edge and shape quality, right? And that's something that I sometimes lose sight of, that factor in painting, or that aspect of painting, and how much of an influence it can have on the read of the painting. That the quality of the shapes, the quality of the edges can create these really interesting feelings of maybe nostalgia or memory or presence. Like in some of these paintings that have these really washy atmospheres, I feel like there is this sense of coming and going of the subject. Like in some areas it's really present, it's really forward, but then it's veiled behind paint in other areas, and I like that contrast of presence. And this was, I think, also from Lake Geneva as well, this reference here from a photo. But this was really fun. I remember being really satisfied with the way that the values and those compressions of values turned out in the what are these called? These overhangs of the building under their sign. 2014 is the year for this one too. And then we have some 2015 little plein air paintings from the second time that I took that plein air summer class with Diane. So these are on a pink gesso ground. I remember that was something that I think she had a jug of pink ground that we could use, and that was a lot of fun. That was one of the first times I really was playing with changing the toned surface of my gesso. Here's another little 4x6 kind of quick, almost like thumbnail size plein air painting, and it was really fun. I remember I was painting these in a little cigar box that I had converted into a painting box, and I had a little piece of glass with tape around it so I wouldn't cut my hands, and then I would store little like chopped brushes. Like I would take a couple of my bristle brushes and I would saw them in half so they were really short so they could fit in the box, and I would keep a few small tubes of paint in there, and a palette knife and some rolled up paper towel. I think I used to use a lot of liquid back in these days, so I had a little plastic container with a lid that I would keep my liquid in, and everything would fit in this little card or cigar box that I still have, and I could just throw it in a backpack or in a bag and bike around and do these little pop-up paintings. So it was really, there's something about the conveniency of your supplies and your materials that I think is really important as a plein air painter. Like, I've gone through so many versions of gear that I can look back and think about the challenges of having like a French box style easel that I have to lug around over my shoulder, and just how infrequently I would go out and paint because it was such a hassle to lug around and hike with these giant, bulky pieces of gear. But if I had something that was very small and kind of pocket size or backpack sized, I feel like I made a lot more paintings. And, the paintings were smaller and maybe they were a lot more suggestive and, reduced in their representation, some of them. Other ones still had quite a bit of information given the scale. But I just was painting more often and I was practicing more often. So it's nice to have, a couple different areas of gear to be able to, what's the word? To be able to fit whatever time frame and space you have to work with. So if you have a whole weekend to go paint somewhere, then bring your bigger gear, bring your bigger canvases. When you're going to have more sessions of long interrupted time, plan for that and have substrates and have easels that are going to allow you to really work for a long time and be comfortable. That's another important part about this. But if you're going for a hike and you just have a little bit of time and you have a backpack that you can throw a little box with some paints and brushes in, make sure you have those different levels of accessible gear. This was from that class as well. This was on a panel that's probably like 6 by 10 inches or so, 6 by 12. This was painted in Jordan Park, I remember, in Stevens Point, which is a park I used to pass all the time when I worked at the Wisconsin Lions Camp in the summers of 2012 and 2013, which, for those of you who don't know, is where I met my wife, Megan. We both worked there in 2012 and in 2013. I'm a little sleep deprived today, so some of my speaking is a little bit, just rough today. But anyway, this was a really fun painting to make. I really liked how the rocks turned out. It was fun to really try to study the temperature shifts and the little textures of moss that were growing on the rocks and the lichen and some of that natural growth that was happening on the rocks. And then I was trying out some new things with plein air. I was like, I want to do some things that are very naturalistic, but that I also want to push some compositional devices and elements and play with line and color and letting go of depicting the entire window. So that was something I was trying here. This is a painting from that second class as well, 2015. So this was probably in like July and August, I think is when we had the class. So it was really warm most of the time. It was perfect, beautiful weather for painting. And this was painted off of the other park that it had the bridge that I painted. So if you continue down that road, you'll get to this big kind of corner U-turn that you have to make, and then on your way down the other side of the channel is where this White House is located, right off of the Wisconsin River there. This panel is probably 11 by 14 inches, as is this one. And this was a little outdoor still life painting that I made at the house of one of the professors. I think it was Matt Groshek, who was a design professor. He started working at the program or at the university, I think my last year of college. So I didn't have a lot of contact with him, but we did chat a few times while I was still in school, and he invited this plein air class to come paint on his farm, which was full of really cool equipment. And he had a few fields around his house and barns, and his house was really interesting. So there was plenty of subject matter to paint, and I chose this little still life of this little wooden basket that somebody had made, this random piece of broken barnwood that had a couple different colors of paint on it. So you can see there was a green and yellow and white primer. When you see an old piece of wood that's kind of weathered by rain and the sun, and bits and pieces of its like outer paint has been peeled and sort of like fallen off. That's kind of what this board looked like, that also had a very jagged, rough edge where it broke. And then there was this plate of nails, which that was something that was a really good exercise in simplifying complex information and grouping shapes together, while trying to convey this sense of accumulation of pieces, right? So this plate probably had like 80 different nails and screws sitting on it, and they were all different shapes and lengths and colors. And so I was trying to figure out how to convey that sense of variety, that sense of accumulation and multiplicity, with very repetitive, small, thin shapes. And this was a really fun exercise for practicing that process. So I'm glad I made this painting. I want to say that this painting is in a private collection. I think that I think it's in a private collection. And then this is 11 by 14 inches as well. And I think this also was purchased for a private collection, but I can't remember now. I had this painting for a few years after I made it, and I want to say that somebody ended up purchasing it. But anyway, this was a study of a forest from looking across a river. I think this was in Jordan Park area, but I'm not positive. And what I liked about this painting was that there was this big contrast of shadow to illuminated trunks and areas. And I was also playing around with the abstraction of shape and edge quality and mark, and really trying to play with almost like designing the shapes, which is something I do a lot now still, where I'm taking something that's very organic and very full in its its form and format, and creating these flat shapes that are very design rendered and simplified and geometric. I was using a lot of flat brushes. So anytime I paint with a flat brush, I tend to have these like really satisfying geometric marks that have very hard edges as I'm, sort of applying the paint or sliding the paint around. And that's something I still do quite a bit today in my paintings. This was painted at the Dells of the Eau Claire River. It's a small little 8x8 painting. Also part of that summer plein air class, looking out at the river. I wanted to challenge myself and really paint a full view and a full scene, and try to get as much of the information in as possible. And that being said, I'm pretty happy with the way that like the bridge area turned out. A lot of what's in the painting is legible and understandable, it seems like, at least to me, like just the different rocks and the planes of the rocks in the river, some of the falls that are formed in the banks of the river. And then the one thing I kind of wish I would have maybe played around with a little bit more are these shapes in the trees. In some areas, I think they're pretty satisfying. Like this passage, I'm not that disappointed in, but this whole area up in the top left, there's just a little bit too much of the same shape and the same mark and the same color, just like repeated throughout most of this tree. I think it would have benefited if I had blocked in some bigger shapes and grouped some bigger shapes, kind of like I did back here in this area. This feels a little bit more natural and organic than a lot of this information here. Just a little mini critique for myself. And now we're in 2017, in this like winter, spring months of 2017. So we just did a pretty big jump from 2015 into 2017. Just to give you some context, in 2016, I was still living in Stevens Point up until August of that year, maybe July or June. And my wife Megan and I were preparing for a bicycle tour for the fall of 2016 going from Kenosha, Wisconsin, where my mom lived at the time, to Queen Creek, Arizona, where her parents live. And, we had planned out this like 2-month bicycle trip where we were going to camp and bike the entire way across the middle of the U.S. And we ended up doing that, and we stayed in Arizona once we got there for like 6 to 7 months or so. And during those months, which overlapped into like May and June of 2017, during that time, I was doing a lot of plein air painting in the desert, just because it was a new landscape, and the light was really, satisfying to try to go out and study and observe and document in my paintings. So these are paintings made in Arizona. This first one here is from a trip that I took, kind of a solo camping trip, painting trip up in Sedona, Wisconsin, which if you've never been, it's a beautiful red rock area of the desert in northern Wisconsin. And from Queen Creek, which is near Phoenix, it was probably about an hour and 45 minutes to get up to Sedona. And I went there in February, so right around this time of year. And in Arizona, in the Phoenix Valley area, the temperature in February is still like in the 60s. So it's beautiful weather. And I was expecting that up in Sedona. And as you can tell by the tone of the story, that's not what happened. So I drove my little Toyota Corolla that I had at the time by myself with some canvases and my easel and some clothes and a little like backpacking stove and my camping gear. And I wanted to go up for a weekend and just paint, on my own time and by myself. And at that time, I was waiting to hear back from the last university where I had applied for graduate school. And, for those of you who don't know this story, I've told it in different ways at different times over the years. But when I was planning to apply for grad school, I looked at 4 different universities, and I applied when I was living in Arizona. So, I'd been away from the Midwest for like 7 or 8 months at that point, maybe, almost a year, because we left for the bicycle trip in August. And I applied for schools in like January and December. So yeah, it was probably about, 6 months or so. And I was like, I really want to study in the Midwest. I like the Midwest. I like the people. I like the culture. It's very relevant for me with my, personal studio work that I've made up until that point. So I was looking at the University of Minnesota. I was looking at the University of Iowa, which both of those I've heard are very good research studio MFA programs. And then I was looking at Rutgers University out in New Jersey, because my professor, my other painting professor, Rob Stolzer, went to Rutgers, and he had some very, some very inspiring stories about his time at school there. And it's historically been a very good painting program. So that was one of the places I applied to. And then I applied to Michigan State University, which was the 4th and final school to reach out. And by this trip in Sedona, it was about 2 weeks after I had heard from the first 3 schools. And I heard within like the same 4 or 5 days that I was not selected for the programs. And I was kind of already assuming that Michigan State probably wasn't going to select me either. And I kind of was starting to get a little bit, down in the dumps a little bit, and feeling a little bit discouraged, and not knowing, if grad school doesn't work out, what do I want to do instead? Like, what's the route that I'm going to try to take? And I would have to wait at least a year before I could apply again. And, it was expensive to apply, and I didn't have a lot of money at the time. I think I spent over $400 just in applications for grad school. And so that felt like a lot of money. And I was just worried that grad school wasn't going to work out that year. And as a way to kind of get my mind off of all of those things that were happening, I was like, I'm going to go on this painting trip. I'm going to go up to Sedona and, see what it's all about and do some painting. And I'd been up there, I think, once before on like an overnight trip with Megan when I was visiting her from Wisconsin when she was still living in Arizona. So I'd seen the landscape before, and I was like, I really want to go and paint there. I think that'd be a lot of fun. So I drove up there, very long story. I drove up there, and as I was getting into Sedona, the temperature was starting to like plummet from 60s to like the 40s. And then by the time I pulled into the downtown area, it was like after 8 o'clock. The sun was already pretty much setting, and the temperature was like 38 degrees. And I was kind of nervous because I didn't find a place to set up and camp. And that was my plan, was to go up there, find a place to set up my tent, camp the first night. And I got there kind of late and it was dark and I didn't want to go out and drive around in these like back trails in my very small Toyota Corolla. And honestly, I tried to do it when I first got there and I ended up on this very like off-road, bumpy, dirt rock road. And I remember hitting this big pothole and hearing metal hit the rock. So I was like, I'm not going to get stuck out in my first night in this small car when it's this cold. I'm just going to turn around and go back into the downtown area. So that's also why it was so dark by the time I was back in the downtown little area of Sedona. And I remember I parked in this public parking lot by these shops, like kind of off the main road, like behind some of the buildings. So it wasn't really visible from the main street. I parked my car and I grabbed my sleeping bag and I basically slept in my car in the driver's seat that first night. And I remember waking up at like 7 a.m., maybe 6 o'clock. It was early because nobody was around and people were kind of starting to come into the town and open up their shops and open up the businesses. And I wanted to make sure I got out of there before like security or the local law enforcement came, because I don't think you were supposed to sleep in the parking lot there. But so I slept for like 7 hours, maybe 6 hours. But of those hours, I probably only got like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and like trying to stretch my legs because I was in this very awkward driver's seat. And I didn't realize it for a while, but I was pushing my feet so hard, and I wasn't wearing shoes. I was just barefoot in my sleeping bag, but I was pushing my feet so hard up against the front of my pedal, like where my pedals are in my car, that I was bending my toes back, but my toes were so numb I couldn't feel how painful it was. And I hit a point where I was pushing so hard that it started to hurt, and I was like, oh my gosh, ow, and I stopped, and I realized that I was like jamming my toes into the front of my car. But anyway, so that was the first night experience camping in my car. The rest of that weekend, I think I was there for 3 nights. So the other 2 nights, I camped in like these really beautiful open desert areas where, anybody could just drive in on these public roads and set up a tent wherever you want. And I had a little stove like I talked about. So I was cooking like sausage and eggs in the morning. And honestly, like I miss those adventures because, everything felt kind of simple. And so rarely do we have that level of freedom, I think, to just go and like not deal with camping permits and not deal with, all the like day-to-day weekly responsibilities. So to have this weekend where I could just go and camp and paint, it was the perfect solution for that chapter I was going through with applying to grad school, which, as many of you do know, it did work out. I came back from the trip and like 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later, I get a call from Michigan State University, and they had invited me into the program, and the rest is kind of history now. But this trip was kind of my way of, dealing with some of those uncertainties at that time. And now I can look back at these paintings and, just enjoy some of the lessons I learned through all of that. And so a lot of these are either Sedona or just Arizona in general. Like this one was in Sedona. Off of the main street, there was this big valley, and it was a very kind of rainy, cloudy day, and everything was very subdued and cool in terms of the color palette. But what I liked about this one was the geometric shapes and the very subtle jumps in color properties, from warm to cool and muted to saturated. So it was fun. It's nice to be able to take what you know about painting and put it in front of these places that are very different in terms of the landscape from what you're used to. So coming from the Midwest in Wisconsin and living in Arizona for these 6 or 7 months with Megan's family and her parents, it opened up some new challenges for me to be able to try to figure out how to convey atmosphere and depth and distance and this kind of rocky landscape. This was a small like 4x6, maybe 5x7 painting. Also 2017 on the Sedona trip, I remember I painted this on the way home back from Sedona to Phoenix, and there was this little gas station that had this really big open parking lot, and you could see some of these like rolling hills under this cloudy sky. I just really loved the cool tones of the landscape and the sky hole sort of shadow shapes that were forming on the mountains here as the sun was coming through the clouds. And these are all oil paintings, all plein air from observation on like pieces of masonite panels that I cut with my father-in-law, Daryl. He had a little wood shop, or he still does. He has this little wood shop where you can cut stuff down, and he helped me create a few different size panels that I gessoed and brought with me up to Sedona. This one was really small. I think this is like 4 by 5 inches, and I know that this one was picked up by some collectors of mine. They have this painting now, and this was a fun one too. This one is also very kind of simple, in a lot of ways. The composition is very simple, the paint handling is somewhat simple, and it has this really fresh immediacy about it that I really like. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And I painted this, I remember, close to my campsite one of the nights. There was this really warm, beautiful sunset that we had, and right before, like probably from like 3 to 5 o'clock, there was this really warm glow on the side of this really interesting rock formation off in the distance. So that's where I was painting this one. And then this, I forgot the name of this little rock channel here in Sedona, but this panel is probably like a 10 by 10 panel, and I painted this in this little neighborhood, and I remember there were signs, like neighborhood watch signs, in this little like hillside neighborhood in Sedona. And I saw these 2 rocks, and I was like, wow, those are pretty satisfying shapes, And I wasn't familiar with the work of Edgar Payne at this time, but I've since really caught on and fallen in love with the work of Edgar Payne. And when I look at this painting, I'm like, oh, there's definitely some stuff I could pull from Edgar Payne and push if I was to paint a view like this again. But anyway, I remember when I was painting this, there were a couple of Sedona police cars that came and parked behind me, probably about 20 feet away, and just sat there the whole time I was painting this. And it just felt like somebody had called and said, there's this strange person in our neighborhood. I don't know what he's doing, but come and, check it out. That's kind of how it felt. So I remember I titled this something about that experience, like being watched by the police or something. But anyway, this was kind of a fun one too. It has that similar kind of quick, application style and immediacy of mark, and some pretty satisfying uses of transparent layers of paint. Like you can see all the way to the gesso in some of these areas here. So this was a lot of fun to make, and just the design is really, to me, it's very satisfying. This big open space that kind of funnels down into this moment on one of the third lines here. This is also Sedona, a view from one of the campsites. These are paintings that I was making when I still kind of had the mentality of quantity can equal, quality, or quantity equals success. And the more you paint, the better things become. And to some extent, I think there is a little bit of truth to that idea and that principle or that way of working. Like, it is a little bit of a numbers game when you're learning how to work with your palette, your materials, the time constraint of plein air painting with changing light. Like you have to know when to work really fast. But more recently, my practice has become rooted in like multi-session painting. And when I look at these paintings, I just feel like they're just kind of sketches. They're really quick. They're very brief. They're trying to capture a very fleeting moment. And a lot of that, I think, comes out of the fact that I didn't have a lot of time. Like I wasn't going to come back and paint in Sedona again. I had a feeling I wasn't going to live permanently in Arizona, even before the grad school thing figured itself out. So I just was like, I have to work really fast, and I want to make a lot of different paintings of a lot of different scenes, which meant that I didn't have a lot of time to make them. So this has a very fast and kind of loose, abstract quality about it that in some ways is, to me, is very satisfying. Just being able to zoom in and look at individual brushstrokes. It's got a very impressionistic kind of feeling about it. The paint was very fluid in a lot of areas too, which is also quite satisfying. That was something that I've since sort of moved away from, that kind of fluid type of paint viscosity. More of my paintings now have kind of a thicker like oil pastel almost type of consistency to them. But anyway, this has, like I said, a very brief and abstract looseness about it that in some ways to me is very satisfying. But compositionally, I think it's kind of boring. I'm not super, I don't look at some of these paintings and go, oh, I really love this painting, I wish I still had it. It's more of like, I'm glad I made it. I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I tried this. I'm glad I still have an image of it that I can look at and learn something from it, and know what I would do differently, and know what I wouldn't do again, or what I would do again. Part of doing these live streams is also a chance for me to kind of have those moments of conversation too, of like, well, what did I learn? What did I try? And what am I glad that I tried? And what would I not do again? And the big thing about these paintings is probably just the rushed feeling. I wish I would have maybe just brought like 3 or 4 bigger canvases and just made like more finished, solid paintings. But you can't go back. You can't change the past. So you just have to take what you tried and pay attention to it and know what you would do differently. I think that's all we can do. So again, it's nice to have these as examples of what happens when I do kind of rush the process, or I do work quickly and I try to bounce around between multiple spots and viewpoints. But this is probably my favorite moment in this particular painting. This was painted right off of the main street, kind of on the backside of some of the shops. I think they have, when I was there at least, it seemed like they had a public sort of walkway that followed the backside of all of these buildings, where you could see this really beautiful valley in Sedona. And I'm pretty sure that's where I painted this painting. But you can see there's this impasto textured area here up in the corner of the hillside that I really like. But otherwise, compositionally, again, like, not my best work. This was painted, I think, down near Phoenix. Like, I don't think this was on the Sedona trip. And honestly, this is not a painting I'm super in love with either. This, again, it has that kind of quick, just trying to rush through the process feeling a little bit. One of my favorite things about living in the valley, though, in Phoenix at Queen Creek, was hiking out into the mountains in the parks and painting from, a slightly raised vantage point where you could see the valley. I wasn't hiking all the way to the peak of the mountains when I was painting, because I didn't have like a backpack like gear system. Everything was in a wooden, very heavy French easel style box that had a strap. So I would be, lugging around this really heavy, bulky easel. So I didn't want to go very far. But I liked that middle ground where I wasn't at the top, but I could still see a little bit of the horizon, and I was peeking over the valley a little bit more. And when you're painting from those vantage points, you see just like this really atmospheric, long space full of houses and buildings and cities. And what I enjoyed painting was trying to, convey that sense of information that's very far away and very small, but also very dense and cluttered. There's something interesting about that sort of contrast or dichotomy of like, there's a lot of stuff, but it's very small from where you're standing, and it's very subdued in its contrasts. So that sense of big and small kind of simultaneously happening is really satisfying to try to think about and try to paint. This was, I think, on the Sedona trip. This was a really tiny little 2-inch by 4-inch panel. I used to make a lot of these little miniature paintings on pieces of masonite that I would also glue magnets to the back of, and I would sell them as little refrigerator magnets. And some of them were plein air paintings. Some of them were masterwork copies that I was making, and some of them were portraits of funny or famous TV show characters or movie characters. So I painted some of the cast from Game of Thrones. I painted some of the Office cast, maybe a few Parks and Rec people. But, it's just kind of fun, just kind of a little, exercise, very low time commitment to make these little paintings. And I sold them for like $30 or $35. And so it was a nice way to make a little bit of extra money when I was living in Arizona with Megan's family. And, when we go out to eat or something, I had some money to pay for my food or other things like that. And that's when I started making those little magnets. And so this is similar almost to the size of the magnets that I was making and selling. This is that spot I was talking about where those police officers came up. So you could see, here's my painting rig that I had with me in Arizona. This was just a little side note. This was a turquoise blue hat that I had. I think it was kind of a gift from the screen printing shop where I worked in Stevens Point after I graduated with my BFA. And it was just this blank turquoise hat that I had. And when I first got it, it was like a vibrant sort of turquoise color like this. And then I wore it during our bicycle tour. And by the time we got to Arizona, it was so sun bleached that it was like a chalky seafoam green color. And there's something, I don't know, I'm one of those people where I get very attached to things like that, and they become these like little time capsules that I don't want to lose. I don't want to, break. And I don't know, I get very sentimental about stuff like that. But in terms of the painting setup here, the palette that you can kind of see in the drawer of my easel, it is a scrap piece of MDF, like 1/4-inch MDF that I had primed. I was going to make a painting on it. And I remember I was up in the mountains in Arizona on a hike making a painting, and I forgot a palette, something to mix my paint on. So I used this extra piece of paneling that was going to be for a painting as my palette. And I did it the one time, and I had wiped it clean, thinking, I'll still make a painting on this at some point. But I just was like, it fits in this drawer kind of perfectly. Maybe I'll just keep it in here and use it as a palette. So I started using it for other plein air paintings and studio paintings. And at one point, I had repurposed a big glass frame from Goodwill as my palette, like for studio work in Arizona that I was doing. I didn't have a studio, but Megan's parents let me work in their like toy hauler camper trailer. And it was actually a pretty nice little area for a studio. And I remember doing some paintings with that glass palette in there. But anyway, the point of the story is that I still have this palette here, and I'll try to remember to bring it to the next live stream, and I can show you what it looks like now versus how it looked when I first started to use it. It's pretty satisfying to have these like really beautiful patinas on palettes. This is where I had made, I think, the painting with the sky holes that I was just talking about a few minutes ago on the way back down from Sedona. So I had found a way to kind of set up a tripod and take a few pictures while I was painting. And here's a little Nalgene water bottle that I lost and I don't have anymore. Gigi's asking about if I still have it. I'm assuming you're asking about the hat that I was talking about. And I think I do still have the hat. I hope I still have it. Because it became like super weathered on the brim, and just, it's kind of gross, but like there was a lot of sweat that had like accumulated over time in the crease of the hat when we were biking. So it's got this gnarly stain. But yeah, I should paint that hat actually, now that we're talking about this. I think that would make for a really unique and fun painting to make, and then hopefully a fun painting to see and look at once it's done. But yeah, there it is again. This is that one of the first Sedona paintings I showed you with those interesting rock formations. This was just painted from the edge of a parking lot at a CVS in Sedona when you're coming down the main road into Sedona. So the actual like shops and like main city areas down in this area, and you kind of come down through this main road. And this is the road where you could get to those different camping spots. So, this direction back here, maybe 4 or 5 miles back down that other direction, is where I was camping during that weekend. And it was pretty cool. It was fun to kind of be like this nomad painter for a weekend and kind of like really try out this idea of like traveling and painting and living off of non-perishable foods and camping with all of your camping gear and living out of your car. And I wouldn't want to do this. I don't think I could handle doing this like full time or for more than maybe a month at a time, which that's a long time to live out of a vehicle. But there's something very satisfying about and this is, I think, why I like the plein air events too, is because you put everything you need into your vehicle and then you drive somewhere, or maybe you fly somewhere, and then you unpack everything and now you make paintings, and then you get to show them, and you get to come home with paintings sometimes too. Usually you don't want to come home with paintings because that means you sold them, but sometimes you come home with your paintings and all of these new experiences and stories, and your well of inspiration is like rejuvenated and refilled. And that's how this trip was. Even though I was solo, I didn't paint with anyone else, I didn't camp with anyone else, I rarely talked to people. I did have a few people come up and talk with me though, and these pictures that we're seeing are from timed cell phone pictures, or maybe even my DSLR camera. This is the camera I use to photograph my paintings that I've had for, almost 10 years now. I bought this in 2015. And anyway, I think that's what I used to photograph myself painting on this trip. But yeah, it was a really great, vantage point. It's a nice, big, open, clear view of that part of the mountain. You can see the beautiful red rock, hue that the rock has. It moves from like a red to an ochre yellow. What was really fun too about painting in those areas is trying to study the temperature of the shadows, and going from a very warm orange to like a violet. That combination is so satisfying to bring into your paintings. And honestly, that's probably the thing one of the biggest reasons why I would want to live in the Southwest is just for painting. And obviously we have some family that's out there too, so it'd be nice to be closer to them. But professionally speaking, it would be really satisfying to drive an hour or half an hour and be able to paint something that's so monumental in its natural makeup and form. And the quality of light that's in the Southwest is so just like, I don't know, interesting and atmospheric, and you get these really beautiful color shifts through the atmosphere of the light. This was painted during an art walk, like a public art walk in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I remember going up to the art walk 2 or 3 times while I lived in Queen Creek, and basically doing like little plein air paintings. And this was of some, I think, chrysanthemum flowers. My flower identification is about as good as my tree identification. So those are 2 things I need to start really, being more studious about, is getting familiar with some of the identifications for things I often paint in nature, especially the trees, though. I've been really into painting trees lately. Anyway, here are some nice juicy close-ups of this flower plein air painting that I did. It was a lot of fun to really play with variety and the mark making and the directions of the line work and the shapes. And it had a very like alla prima feel to it. A lot of the paint is sort of blended wet into wet, which was really fun to do. I think my in-laws have this painting now too. I think I don't know if they bought it or if I gifted it to them. It's hard because they've got a bunch of my paintings. Some of them they bought and some of them I gifted. So it's nice to know who has some of these paintings, and I still get to see them, which is really nice. And then this is a little cactus, and I want to say that Megan's aunt, Lori, I think has this little painting. It's very small. It was on Arches oil paper. It's like a 3-inch by 4-inch painting or something like that. And it was made in plein air out in one of these parks in near Queen Creek, Arizona. As were these other Arches oil paper paintings here. And you can see, I mean, I'm trying my best to really become familiar with some of the hues and color, relationships that I was seeing. There's things when I look at this where I'm like, ooh, this is a way too cool of a yellow. Like that probably isn't very accurate. A lot of the blues have kind of a greenish hue to them. I think that's probably not totally accurate. The landscape, I think, to me feels pretty believable though, so I'm pretty happy with some of those areas. These were all painted, I think, on the same day. Like, I remember bringing my pad of Arches oil paper and just taping off little, sections and making paintings in the taped off little thumbnail areas. And then once it was dry, I think I scanned the paintings. You can kind of see, if you look closely, all these little specks of dust. That was one of the craziest things about living in Arizona, was dealing with the amount of dust that was constantly on everything all the time. So as a painter, you have to just sort of accept that your paintings are going to have a texture and these little very microscopic interruptions that come with painting in the desert. There's some areas where you can really see just bits of sand, so it's kind of funny to go back and remember those moments. I don't remember the actual locations of these little paintings on paper, but I think some of them were in the Santan mountain range, which is kind of by Queen Creek. Other ones were made in Canyon Lake, which was like an hour away from Queen Creek. So it varies on the location, but I remember after they dried, I cut them down with an X-Acto knife, and then I mounted them to foam core. And I was going to make frames for them, and I think I still have a lot of these little paintings, so I don't know what I'll do with them. But like this one I really like a lot. I like the contrast of the values. I like the high key, horizon line. I like the way that the sky turned out. It doesn't feel too overworked, which some of the other ones to me feel kind of overworked. And what's nice too is that even though it's very bright and high key, there's still quite a bit of paint. It's really about those color relationships and really trying to, pay attention to the relativity of the color shapes. And, it wasn't as transparent. I was using a bit more opacity in the paint. And it really is about the color relationship, not about, the color shifting because of how translucent the paint is. It's like that's the color of the paint that's on the surface. So it was nice to be able to push that in those paintings a little bit more. This is one of my favorite paintings I made in plein air in Arizona. This is a mesquite tree on my in-laws' property, right along one of their fences, which I didn't paint the fence, but it was more of a painting about the tree. And this was one that I painted, I think in at least 2, but maybe 3 different sessions, where I reset up everything and I painted it more than once. And a lot of the painting is that first layer, that first kind of washy session, and then there's moments where I was rendering some of the branches and kind of carving in shapes for the trunk of the tree. That was most of the second session. And then these little pockets of impasto paint, that was also during that second, maybe third session. So I think I still have this painting too, and I'm glad, because it was a really fun one to make. And I think this is around 8 by 12 inches or so, if I had to guess. This one is about 4 by 5 or 5 by 6, somewhere in there. Really quick, kind of loose gestural painting, very reduced and simplified. There's not a lot of marks and shapes in this one, mostly because it was painted obviously very quickly, but I think it was painted during like the beginning of a sunset sort of hour. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't overwork this one into the sunset. I wanted to do a second painting during the sunset, so I knocked this one out pretty quickly. But there's things I like about it still. This one I prefer between the two. This is the sunset one that I made. I think they were the same day, but maybe I'm misremembering that. This was a really fun painting to make. It's got some really thick, juicy moments of paint. There's a lot of variety in the shapes and the marks and the quality of the marks that are here. I like the layering aspect of this one. And this was painted all in one go. So it's all of this layering happened alla prima. So the panel was kind of toned with this kind of seafoam, greenish color. And then I blocked in the mountain range. I want to say this is Flatiron in Arizona. I think that's the mountain range I'm looking at here, but I might be wrong about that. And then, yeah, kind of going back to what I said before about all of the little intricacies of buildings and houses and, some of the more high contrast reflections that were in the neighborhoods and the cities down in the valley. I was trying to kind of suggest some of that with these little impasto moments, but I don't know if that's really how I would handle that today. I probably would be a bit more strategic about the colors I was using and the shapes and the variety of shapes, because it just feels like they're just sort of plopped down on the panel. I do really like the way that the mountains turned out, though, especially this one. It's one of the things about painting that's very fun to try to practice is this idea of economy and simplification, where you're taking something fairly complex and you're trying to minimize it to its most reduced, inherent form. So using only two colors and two values to describe something that has these shifting planes of light and shadow is a really good way to practice seeing the underlying structure of an object. That's what I really like about this part of the painting. This is another Arizona one. I think this is near Flatiron as well. All of this was painted, I think, with the same brush, which was this natural hair mongoose brush that I got from Rosemary and Company as part of a set. It was the Felicia Forte, brush set. I really loved her work, and I was like, oh, this will be kind of fun to use some of the same brushes that she likes to use, because she had a very graphic kind of style to her paintings when I was looking at them a lot back in 2016, 2015. And so I bought that brush set for like $80, and half of those brushes I just destroyed because I didn't know how to take care of brushes well enough, and shouldn't have, invested in such nice tools. But regardless, I did anyway. And one of the brushes was this mongoose hairbrush. That one and a sable hairbrush were my two favorites of that whole like 12 brush pack that I bought. And this one was painted with the mongoose brush, which had a little bit of kind of a frayed tip to it. Like, I think the brush was about the size of my finger, but the hairs were a little bit, frayed and or splayed. I don't know what the right word is, but that's why we have these 3 or 4 line kind of marks dragging throughout the painting. And that's something else that I kind of want to keep trying today, is going back to this variety of mark and brush handling, combining it with marks that are more full or filled in and flat, just to kind of create some contrast in paint handling there. This one was made with that brush in some areas too, especially in the sky. You can see that. And then I was also, maybe a little bit of a gimmick at this time. I was allowing some of the warm ground to show through, and that's probably not something I would do today, is allow this much of the warm ground to come through. But again, this is all part of the journey. We're seeing Hector in 2017 painting in the desert, finding his way, plein air painting on his own time and in new places, and there's no teacher or there's no gallerist or collector or anyone there being like, don't do this, or do this more. And I think we all have to have moments where we have no outside pressure from anyone else's opinions, to just try stuff that we want to try because it sounds fun and because it seems like it'll be worthwhile. And a lot of these paintings for me come out of that sort of spirit of painting, which I'm very happy to be able to go back in time and go, wow, this was fun to see what I was into at that time. And and a lot of it is just because I was into a certain painter, or I was into a certain way of painting, or I was into a certain color palette and a certain tool. And I think that's something too that I think about a lot when I'm at a plein air event, talking with artists who are kind of new to plein air or maybe new to painting, is just being open and honest about this journey of experimentation and allowing yourself to let go of control and to let go of really directing your process too much. I think there's something healthy about having a little bit of a plan, but then leaving everything pretty open to sort of just discover what the painting can become. And that's honestly kind of a skill and a habit in and of itself, that we have to practice. We have to be mindful about that relationship to control and to expectations as a painter. So this was painted in Queen Creek, really close to where Megan's parents live and where she grew up. There's this really big field on the other side of the street that they live off of. And her mom and her dad would walk with their horses in this field growing up. And when I lived with them, I did a few paintings kind of the Santan Mountains. I think these are the Santan Mountains. Or no, Four Peaks. But maybe they're superstitions. So it's the Four Peaks that are part of the Superstition Mountains. I think that's right. And I remember Four Peaks because there's a brewing company called Four Peaks Brewing Company that had a very, very delicious IPA that I used to drink when I was living there. Man, I kind of want to go find some of their beer and see if any distributors here in Wisconsin carry their beer. Okay, this is 2018. We're almost at the end of the portfolio. And, again, thank you to Steven and Jane and Gigi for tuning in live. It's always fun to be able to talk, knowing that people are actually listening live. And thank you for contributing to the chat and, sharing some questions and bits of your experience. And before I sign off, which isn't going to be for a little while still, if those of you who are listening do want to throw in your Instagram handles, I'd be happy to read those aloud. And that's another fun aspect about doing these live streams is that it starts to build this network, and it's nice to feel like you're part of a community of people. So if you'd like me to share that, please type that in so I can read that out loud, just in the chance that for some reason I forgot to click the little setting that keeps the chat comments viewable in the recording. I've done that with most of the streams, but in case I forgot. So Gigi's is Green Goodies Gives, GreenGoodiesGives, Green Goodies Gives. So go check out her Instagram. I think you should be able to find like her TikTok and YouTube channel and all that other stuff through her Instagram. I'm glad you were here, Gigi. Thank you again for participating and just throwing out ideas and comments. And it's like, and you of all people too know how nice this feels because you were a teacher in part of your career too, and to have students or to have people in a classroom or in any kind of a presentation that are really giving back as you're talking is such a valuable thing, and it's something I do not take for granted. So I just want you to know how much I appreciate your comments with Jane and Steven too, who had chimed in earlier in the stream. All right, back to the painting so we can start to wrap up here. This is a very small painting on gessoed paper. It's about 4 inches by 6 inches, and this was painted in 2018 when I was in grad school. I started grad school in 2017, so just to kind of bridge us from the Arizona paintings to now, I applied to grad school, got into Michigan State. In June or May of 2017, I drove my Corolla with all of my stuff back to Wisconsin and kind of unpacked and prepared for my move to Michigan with Megan. She was still teaching high school in Arizona, so she came out later. And I'm trying to remember how that worked. Like if I flew back out, now I can't remember because we've moved her technically twice from Arizona to the Midwest. One of the times we took a really fun, big national park kind of road trip. The second time, I don't remember if we did that together now. I think I might have flown out and rode back with her though. Anyway, so started grad school from 2017 to 2018. I was mostly working in a studio environment as a grad student. I was teaching drawing. I was, really back in like a studio student mindset, which was really fun and very fulfilling. And I was being exposed to like all these new things and new ways of thinking, new artists, new ways of working, a new community of people and students. And it was really fulfilling that first year, especially just to be like in a new place, going through all of that in Michigan. And then that summer I came back to Wisconsin and lived at home in Brighton with my mom and my brother, and Megan was living there with us too for some of the summer. And I was doing some plein air painting a little bit that summer. And, I was really into, pushing the quality of the paint viscosity at the time. So I was making these like backyard little impressionistic plein air paintings. So this is made with a little bit of brush, but a lot of palette knife work. And these are fairly quick impressions of painting. And I still have these little paintings, which I'm very thankful for, because most of them, because my mom actually sold our house in 2020. 2019, at the end of 2019. So this was, shortly before I would have to say goodbye to this place, and this place where I grew up, and this place that holds so many formative experiences and really incredible memories, and just this symbol of my youth. And when I think about my upbringing, this is the place where I think about my upbringing, right? So when you lose access to those places, it's hard, and it's something I've never really had to deal with before. So I painted these long before that was ever considered, that that she would kind of downsize and move, and this would not be kind of in the family's possession anymore. So there's this like real free, expressive, excited, very optimistic kind of feeling I get when I look at these abstract little paintings. And this is of, if I remember correctly, this is of a tree that is an apple tree in our backyard. So it's really hard to tell, but this is the trunk of the tree, and this is sort of the bulk of the actual tree with the fruit and everything, and part of our backyard. And what's really funny about that tree is that I think my mom had planted it herself, and something happened partway through its like early growth where the trunk had sort of split. Like part of the tree, I think it got so heavy that it started to lean, and then it cracked the trunk of the tree. And the way that we tried to preserve its life and tried to fix that was by placing a like sawhorse stand underneath the leaned part of the trunk. And the tree continued to grow year after year after year, and it kept producing apples, which was really cool. And we had animals on our farm, and of the animals that we would give apples to were these two miniature donkeys that my mom bought while we were in, I want to say we were in middle school when she got the donkeys. And they live a very long time. So the donkeys are still on the property, and the new owners have horses and other animals. So it's really nice to be able to think about this and know that the donkeys they're still living there. That's their home. Hopefully they're still getting apples off of this tree. I don't know if the tree is still alive, but when I look at this painting, it's such a bittersweet feeling for me, because it's this symbol of this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place with my favorite people in the whole world that are infused in the memories of the space. And it reminds me of these moments that I learned so many things about love and relationships and nature and time and animals and responsibility and taking chances. Like all of those things really started growing up in this place. So it's nice to know I have these paintings still. This is another one I made the same day. And they were meant to just be kind of fun exercises in composition and shape, in loose paint application, really playing with the viscosity of the material and allowing things to be more organic and more gestural and impressionistic, which again, if we've learned anything through this portfolio, it's that there's a lot of diversity in application and in the way that I'm conveying the information, between abstraction and representation. And again, I think my philosophy, obviously, I practice what I preach, and this idea that I think every artist needs to go through these different modes of working and modes of thinking to figure out what it is that you really want and what it is that you really like in your process and in the formal elements of your work. And I've definitely put that to practice here in some of these varied applications of painting. And, I remember around this time too, I was also inspired by artists that were teaching at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. There's a painter, Martin Campos, that I really admire. I really like his work a lot. He's a really good example of somebody who pushes representation and abstraction, and he was influenced by someone like Alex Konevsky, who I also really like a lot and taught at PAFA. And so there's this lineage of thinking and painting and interpreting space and light that sits on a spectrum of abstraction and representation, and I was really interested in this idea of abstraction at the time, and so I was painting these field studies of clouds, also from our property. I think this painting sold actually to someone in France through my Etsy shop. So when I was in grad school, I didn't have a shop on my website. I had the same website, but I didn't have an online storefront because it was really expensive. It wasn't until like a year out after I graduated in 2021. So I graduated in 2020 with my MFA, and then I think by the start of 2021, I had the shop. So I was selling some small paintings on Etsy, and this one was one that sold to a collector in France. So it's cool to know that the painting is in France, but selfishly now I'm like, I kind of wish I had this painting because it is this document of my connection to my home where I grew up. And then this is the last painting I think I have from that same couple of days where I was home for the summer from grad school. It was shortly before I was going to go do my first artist residency in Vermont at the Vermont Studio Center. And I was painting in this kind of like thick impasto way kind of that summer going into the residency. So there is sort of a consistency, at least in the couple of paintings I made during this time. But if I zoom in, you can really see the thickness of the paint and just the kind of, gooey, goopy qualities of the paint. And again, this is on gessoed paper, so you can kind of see a little bit of the brush marks of the gesso where there's, thinner areas of paint, like in here where I'm scraping with my palette knife and revealing some of the toned gesso area. What I also really like, though, about these paintings is the variety of direction. Like in this area right here, the paint is moving around and kind of sweeping in all these different directions. So in what would otherwise be a very simple, very non-interesting passage of the painting because it's just kind of the same color and there's not a lot of shapes and clouds right here, there's ways where we can create dynamic moments just in the way that the paint sits on the surface. And that was something that I was really trying to play around with here, I remember. But anyway, yeah, such a beautiful, beautiful place. And then this is my last painting for today in this portfolio. I was trying before I came on today when I was making this part of my website to go back and find as many plein air or like somewhat landscape plein air-esque paintings that I made from 2013 to 2018, and these are all the ones that I could find within the time frame that I had and have access to still. So there's a possibility I might source more examples, in the future. And in that case, I would encourage whoever is watching this to check out my website for any updates on this particular portfolio, or if you want to go and see the rest of my portfolio as well. You can find all of those archived images there. But okay, so this was a painting I made while I was in grad school. It was a commission. Let's see, you had a customer. What year are we up to? So Jane, this is the last painting for today. This was made in 2018, I think. I'm wondering if I could read my little inscription. I think this is an 8 right here, 2018. And this was a painting that I made as a commission for a woman that went to Stevens Point, actually, with Gigi and I, who was there at the same time. And she was a theater major. Emily Reeves is her name. And I didn't know her very well, but we met once or twice while we were both in school. And again, because the art building was set up as this giant sort of warehouse almost of artists and creatives, you just sort of got used to seeing the same people year after year when you were in the programs. And she and I graduated at the same time. And I remember there were these 2 awards that art students were eligible for, and she and I both earned or were awarded these 2 different awards. One of them was called the Hipstamatic Entrepreneurship Award. that was the award that I received as an undergrad student. I had to apply for it, and there was a whole presentation, and there was a committee of people, and there were a few other artists that applied, but they ended up choosing me for this $5,000 award, which, coming out of undergrad, that was super, super helpful in kind of setting up some of the tools and materials that I needed to really continue to pursue my business as an artist. And she earned a different award, I think, for the same amount. And we had to do a little photo opportunity with the chancellor and I think the dean of the college. So I remember meeting her briefly at that moment. But fast forward from 2015 to 2018, she had reached out to me on Instagram, I think, and was like, "Hey, Hector, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Emily. I see that you're in grad school at Michigan State University. It's kind of interesting. That's where I grew up, is in East Lansing, Michigan." And I was like, wow, no way. That's, what a small world. That's crazy. And then she was like, "I'm reaching out because I have this idea for a commission that I'm wondering if you have any interest in." Basically, she said that her parents in 2018 were moving from East Lansing. Yeah, Jane, I know I'm noticing that my when I initially created the live stream schedule yesterday, I was planning to just go through my more recent portfolio. And then I was like, if I'm going to talk about my plein air stuff, I should just put up a portfolio on my website and go back as far as I can. And, it's nice to have this chronological lineage or timeline of my painting. So I'm glad I changed it, but the title currently is wrong. So I will have to change that once this is over. But anyways, with Emily's commission here, she was like, "My parents are going to sell our house and they're going to move, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to do a painting of their house, and preferably like from observation, like to go there and paint it on location." And I was like, "Yeah, of course, I would love to do that. That sounds amazing." And so we kind of set up a payment structure, and her and her siblings kind of went in together and bought this little 8x10-inch painting that I made a float frame for, and they split the cost and gifted it to their parents for the holidays, kind of as like a memento of this place where all of them spent so much time. And it's funny to end on this painting after talking about my home where I grew up and how paintings, they do start to have this really powerful sentimental presence to them for reasons like this. If you're painting a person or a place, and then for some reason those things are no longer with you anymore, or the people aren't with you anymore, the painting can be this very meaningful reminder of all of the stories that you share with that place or that person. And it was really cool to be able to do this for somebody else before I even had to kind of experience a similar thing in my own life. And so I did this. I went and she sent me the address, and she said they're not going to be home this one weekend. If you can do it then, that would be perfect. So I drove to the neighborhood. I parked my car. I set up my easel, and I made this plein air painting. And I think I worked on it just once, maybe twice. I can't remember now how many sessions it took to paint, but yeah, she really liked it. Her siblings really liked it, and I let it dry. Built a frame for it, and I shipped it out like months later. But I remember she said that when they gave her parents the painting, that they were so just in love with it. And I think her mom and, they were like emotional, and just, it meant so much to them. And it was this big surprise. And it's, just to have this handmade thing that was observed and preserved in person, I think it means a lot more when you have an object that somebody created in that space from their own perspective and their own experience. So it's nice to have that other kind of element in this particular painting for the client. And I've done that now 2 other times, actually, where I've been hired to come and do like a house portrait, which those are really fun commissions, or some of my favorite kinds of commissions to do. And I might even try to advertise that a little bit more this year and see if maybe that could lead to some commission opportunities. But she told me, Emily did say something like, I've already established that once my parents pass away, that this is my painting, which I thought was super funny. And just really, that's also kind of heartwarming to hear that they're like siblings are fighting over something that you made. But that's a really good story, I think, to end the stream on today. I'm glad that I'm cutting this under the 3-hour mark. My last couple streams have been over 3 hours. So I'm trying to be a little bit more fast on telling some of these stories. But we looked at a lot of paintings today, so it's like you have to spend a lot of time going through all of these different chapters and moments of process and ideas and materials and different phases that I've been trying out in my own art practice. So that is going to wrap us up for today. Again, huge thank you to Gigi and Jane and Steven for participating in today's chat. It's, like I said earlier, it's always a lot of fun to get to kind of converse virtually like this over the chat, and to get some like real-time live feedback on some of the paintings is always a really nice thing. So I just want to thank them and thank whoever else tuned in today that was here during the live stream. And then if you were watching this as a recording, thanks for watching all the way through. I hope that it was informative or inspiring, maybe even a little bit educational. Any ideas and questions or comments that you want to share with me, I'm always open to welcoming those down in the comments of this particular video. If you have other questions that are maybe not related to the video or you don't want them to be public, you can always contact me through my website on the contact page. I have a link to email me right here on the contact page. While I'm here, I might as well remind everyone that I do have an email list, a newsletter email list, where I try to not over spam people's inboxes, but if I can, I try to get an email out at least once a month and share some updates that I'm not sharing on YouTube or on other platforms. So if you'd like to join my email list, you can do that here. If you do, please fill out your full name. That way I know who's who in the emails. Sometimes I do giveaways, so it's nice to know the name of the person I'm going to have to ship a sticker to, or maybe a zine. So I might bring that back at some point in the future as well. And then, I am a employed artist, so I do have to plug my shop where if you're an art collector, if you're someone who wants to support my business as a independent artist, I have some gallery affiliations, but a lot of my sales also happen independently, and everything here is ran very DIY. So if you buy a painting, let's say from my Plein Air portfolio here, you're going to get a painting in a package that was wrapped and shipped, and for the most part the panel and the canvas and the frame was all built by hand. So you're going to get more than just a painting. You're going to get something that really was created intentionally with a lot of time and effort and attention to the details of the craft, and really a unique object that represents a lot of different things. So if you'd like to add to your art collection or start your art collection, go ahead and take a look at my shop. It always is awkward to do this type of like commercial advertising, but you got to do it. You have to do it if you want to survive as an artist. So take a look around. I've got some merchandise, printed stuff like stickers and books here, and then some of my studio work is available here as well. Speaking of gifts for family or friends, if you want to support my art practice and my business by gifting someone else some of my artwork and you don't know what they would like, there are ways to sign up for a gift card where you can choose your amount on a gift card that is then redeemable only in my online shop. So it's sort of giving somebody else some of my artwork, but letting them choose where the funds will go. Maybe they want a commission, maybe they want a book, maybe they want a studio painting. So it leaves it kind of open, but you can get the gift cards through this link right here. All right, that is it for today. This was a really fun video to make. It was a fun conversation. I appreciate Jane and Gigi for continuing to add some comments here at the end too. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting me and taking time out of your lives to engage with the work that I've been making over the years. Like I said, it was just a lot of fun to go down memory lane and turn the clock back over 10 years now and look at paintings that really were the foundation for the work I'm making today. So again, that's really, for me, that's the reason why I'm doing these live streams, is to almost like connect the dots or shine a light on, where everything started and how I got to where I am now. And I'm hoping that for whoever watches these streams, you can feel a sense of connection to the commentary and some of the stories that I'm sharing. But that is officially the end. That's the last thing I'll say. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day today. I know I will be. I'm about to pack up my backpack and my easel so that I can go work on this painting that I showed you earlier in today's stream. So like I said, I'm about 5 sessions into this painting. I'm hoping maybe 2 or 3 more and it's going to be done. This again is for a year-long art project I'm doing with a local park in my hometown area here. So if you want to keep up with those projects, check me out on Instagram at Hector Acuna Plein Air or Hector Acuna Studio, depending on what kind of work you want to follow. And then I was able to hold it today. Didn't have to go to the bathroom, but I just wanted to show you that from now on I will be doing these, more interesting break scenes in the live stream. So if I do have to get up and excuse myself, this is the kind of stuff I'll probably try to project from now on. It's fun to share some work and give people more to look at than just the "we will be right back" headline there. So this was a painting from 2022 from Dubuque, Iowa at the Bluff Strokes event. So anyway, that's it for today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone, and I will see you in the next stream, which I'm thinking is going to be either on Sunday or Monday. I might try to get in this routine of doing Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That feels like a pretty good, commitment, and we'll see where things go from there. For those of you who have not been following along, the plan is to get through all portions of my portfolio on my website. So far we've done live streams on the entire archive of my studio practice, and after today now we've done the archive of my plein air practice. So what I might do then on Monday is continue, I don't know, let's see, I'll leave it open. If anyone has an opinion, would you rather hear plein air work in the next live stream, or would you rather have me jump back to the studio work and do current studio work? So if you're watching this and you have an opinion on that, please add that to the comments of the video, and I'll consider that before I make up that choice. But then eventually, just to give you a sense of where these streams are headed, the plan is to get through both of these portfolios, jump into the murals, and then the commissions, and then it would be really fun to do a series on the sketchbook pages, which is a very big portfolio. These are pages that go back all the way to, I think, college as well. So there's a lot of ideas that I've played around with and messed with in my sketchbooks. So that might be the kind of caboose portion of the portfolio, discussions series of my live streams. And then, maybe we'll scatter some other topics here and there in between some of these portfolio rundowns. But if people have any suggestions or ideas for topics on live streams, I'm also open to that. So Gigi, I know, is somebody who also live streams or is kind of getting into it as well. So if you check out her artwork, make an effort to find her live streams too and support what she's up to. Okay. Now I think that's officially the end. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day. I'm going to keep it under 3 hours today. And I will see you probably on Monday if you have time in the afternoon to tune in. So take care. Goodbye.